Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year to the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. We have quite a large agenda this morning, and I know Martin's promised me he's read every page. Anyway, as Steve said, if we can keep our videos on as much as possible, unless you're having problems speaking, and then turn them off. Going on to agenda item number 1, we take apologies. Is there any apologies? Don't think we've had any apologies. Is there any declarations of interest on today's agenda? I've got a hand up from Tony. You're muted, Tony.
Unmute.
Yep.
I'm a school governor at Prestatyn High School, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Paul?
I have a granddaughter at YSGOLION, item 7.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else? I must show an interest. I'm Chair of Governors at Christ the Word Catholic School, item 7. And Merrick?
Llywodraethwr Ysgol Cefnmeriadog.
Thank you, Merrick. Ellie Chard?
I know I'm an observer, Barry, but I'm a governor at YSGOLION. Okay.
Is that all the declarations of interest? Thank you. Moving on, urgent matters. I've got no urgent matters that's been put forward to me. We'll move on then to agenda item number 4, which is the minutes. Pages 7 to 16. These are the minutes of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee held on the 18th of November 2020. I'll go page for page first of all, and we'll come back on any. If we start with page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15. If we go back then to any, Merrick, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry poeni chi, ond dydych chi ddim yn rhestru pwy di'r cadeirydd a'r is-gadeirydd. Dim ond mater ydi, ond mae o'n bwysig pan ni'n gwybod pwy ydi'r swyddogion yno. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, thinking about me, Merrick. Thank you very much. Martin?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of items I picked up from the minutes. Page 8, there's the recruitment of the senior auditor. Have we managed to achieve that? Just one question for Lisa there. And page 9, audits, some of them are still on hold. I'm assuming that's the same situation because of the COVID position we're in now. Let's have a look. Yeah, page 10, CIW, I'm assuming that they're not undertaking checks at the moment, certainly of nursing homes and things like that, because again of COVID restrictions. No, and that's I'm happy with that.
Can I ask Lisa then on those 3?
Hello. Yeah, the senior auditor post has been filled. Maeve Poulson-Jones has joined the call, so she's sitting in on the meeting today to observe. The audits that were on hold, they are still on hold. So and that's something I pick up later in my internal audit update report around the capacity of the audit team. And CIW, I'm afraid I can't comment on that one. I'll find out and I'll get back to you.
Mr. Chairman, there was one other item, if I may. Did we add county lines to the risk register, risk 1? If you remember, I raised that as an item. I'm just wondering, probably we can't answer that today. I think Yola was here doing that presentation. I'm just concerned that we've added county lines as a risk to our risk register. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Tony, you raise your hand? No? No, okay. Anybody else have any problems with the minutes? Okay, could I ask, oh, sorry, Paul. You're on mute, Paul.
Okay, sorry, Chair, this is not accuracy. This is really a follow-up. Page 14, item 9, corporate governance annual report. Has it gone to council or is it yet to go, please?
It went council, didn't it?
Yes, Chair, it's been to council.
Did you get that, Paul, from Gary?
No, sorry.
Yes, it's been, oh, sorry, I do. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
DIWYDDARIAD, Gary.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, it has been to council.
Ah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers, Paul. Anybody else before moving on? Could I ask someone then to propose the minutes and someone to second? Alan proposed, Martin second. Thank you very much. Moving on then to agenda item number 5, which is the Local Government and Election Wales Bill Performance and Governance. To receive a report, copy attached, on the consultation on the draft statutory guidance for the principal councils, which determines how they should exercise their performance and governance functions, as set out in Part 6 of the Local Government and Election Wales Bill. I think it's YOLO, is it?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm here to just give you a briefing. Are you able to hear me? I can hear some of you, I can see some of you struggling.
Everybody here, YOLO? No, Martin saying no. Can you turn your video
Turn your
off?
mic up.
And see if
Is that any better? Can you hear me now?
That's better. That's better.
Right. Okay. Must be this little thing here. I need to hold it in front of me. So I'm here just to brief you today on one aspect of the Local Government and Election Wales Bill relating particularly to performance and governance. Now, apologies to those of you who have already heard this spiel from me in a previous committee. I am doing the rounds with Gary, and he's going to follow by giving you a fuller briefing on the broader aspects of the bill, but I'm focusing just on the performance and governance aspect. The reason we're doing it separately is because it's quite pertinent that this committee, above all, consider the current statutory guidance that's out for consultation, which will close on February the 3rd. Now, I say it's particularly pertinent for this committee because there are specific ramifications in that you are going to be as much involved in looking at performance as performance scrutiny has been up until now under the Local Government Measure 2009. So I'm just going to briefly explain what I've read as being the key implications of the draft statutory guidance. There are 3 areas that I think we as a council need to put particular effort into responding towards. The first is to do with self-assessment. The second is to do with an annual stakeholder survey. And then the third is panel performance assessment. So I've set those out in the cover report, and I'll just explain each one by one. Certainly the main thrust of the statutory guidance is around a principal council needing to compile a self-assessment report in each financial year. Now, at the moment, as an authority, we produce, of course, a raft of annual reports. We produce, obviously, the annual performance report that you see once a year, the corporate governance statement, annual statements of accounts, and then beneath those, there's a raft of other sort of ad hoc reports that, for example, internal audit might produce, reports on workforce, monthly budget updates. So what this self-assessment is it's basically the sort of catch-all, the umbrella. It will be the document at the top of the pyramid that captures the conclusions of all those annual reports underneath. And it can be as large or as small as we like, which is good. We are given flexibility into how it's constructed. So it could be, for example, a 2-pager that just links with the key conclusions of all the reports. So it could link to the annual performance report with just its key highlights, for example. Personally, we think it's a good natural step in the maturity of our performance management framework, but it does have to be separate to what we already have in place. So within the consultation, there are a couple of things that have sent our little bells ringing. One particularly is there are a couple of references to the self-assessment needing to be an ongoing live process, responding in real time to challenges and opportunities. So that suggests that, for example, if internal audit were to write a report on, say, risk management that flagged up serious concerns for the authority, then we would need to update our risk assessment. Sorry, our self-assessment. So that, by the very nature of it needing to be live and ongoing, that poses immediately a technical challenge that we don't have a solution for at the moment. So there could be costs involved in whatever solution we put in place. That's just one example where we've raised some concern. It also, throughout the statutory document, refers to council functions. We must say how we are performing against council functions, but it's not clear what those functions are. That could be interpreted in many different ways. It could be, for example, strategic high-level functions, or it could be operational. You know, you could drill that down to individual teams within the council. So we've asked for clarity about what sort of level are they expecting us to pitch it at. Hopefully, they're thinking strategic functions. So the second aspect of the statutory guidance is this need to consult with stakeholders. Now, if you've managed to read through the 36, 37 odd pages of the statutory guidance, it's suggesting that we consult with everybody and anybody. You name them, they're there. From everyone inside the council, all councillors, opposition and executive, all staff at every level, strategic and operational, and then outside the council, partners, PSB, town and community councils, sorry, city, town and community councils, trade unions even, massive list of stakeholders that we are expected to consult with. Now, in principle, that's fine, but it's also requiring us to do this on at least an annual basis. Now, currently, the council is only set up to conduct biannual surveys, such as the resident survey or the staff survey. So there's a significant piece of work for us to do there in fairly short order to map our current survey landscape, to understand the kind of questions that we routinely ask of residents, tenants, carers, for example, and then to try to rationalize it, hopefully, into a process whereby we have an annual mechanism for seeking input from stakeholders about how the council is performing. And then the third aspect is around a panel performance assessment. So the council needs to appoint an independent panel that will effectively act as a peer review and replace the current sort of corporate assessments that Audit Wales conduct upon us every 5 years or so. So the panel assessment would happen once in a council term, and it would apply for the next council's term, not this council's term. So we'd need to set this up from May 2022. Now, when I took this to chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny, I sought their input on when do you think in a council term it would be appropriate to hold that panel performance assessment. Lots of pluses and minuses either way, either you hold it at the start of a term or at the end of the term. But I think the conclusion, and probably the right conclusion, is that we need to ask the next council when they want to hold that assessment. But again, I'm happy to field corporate governance's opinions on that. So then finally, just briefly to mention, I know Gary will touch on this as well in his presentation, the Auditor General will have new powers to initiate a special inspection of principal councils that are not meeting their performance requirements. The implications of that might be varied depending on the outcome, of course, but the sort of at the fine point of the stick, it could effectively empower Welsh ministers who have also been empowered to deconstruct, reconstruct, merge councils, depending on the outcome of a special inspection, for example. So that's it in the main. Those are the main points. I'm happy to open it up to questions now.
Thank you, Iolo. And I see that Martin has his hand up.
Well, I'll start the ball rolling on this one, Mr. Chairman, but I'll leave it to somebody else on the others. I think you've answered some of my questions, Iolo. The self-assessment, obviously, my question was going to be, oh, excuse me just a second. Can you come back to me in a moment? I'll have to take this call. 1 moment, please.
Anybody else wish to speak? Don't see any other hands at the moment.
While Martin's on the phone,
Yes,
I should clarify one slight crucial point that I have left out. The requirements of corporate governance to look once a year at the self-assessment. So the self-assessment must now be brought to corporate governance. So usually with a performance document such as that, we would take it to performance scrutiny for their input, of course, but it now must also come to corporate governance for corporate governance to make recommendations upon. And if the council chooses not to adopt those recommendations, we must say why in the document.
Thank you, Iolo. Martin, yeah, come on.
Sorry about that. It was a resident about an issue, and I told them I'll ring them back. Sadly, my secretary is not quite quick these days, getting out of the chair to answer the phone, so apologies there. Local government, the local government bill. One of the questions I was going to ask, because this all-encompassing, sort of self-assessment now, were we dropping any of the other reports that we do? I think you're implying that we won't be, and that they will all feed into that particular assessment. So again, just more work for us, unfortunately. And I must admit, I did read with a wry smile that the Welsh ministers are also now on the list for getting all these self-assessment reports. So it's nice to know that they will be as busy as we are in reading them all. Stakeholder survey, again, we're going to be busy on that score because you've already covered that to a point. And I was going to say, we're going to be touching so many more stakeholders now. So that in itself is going to be quite a job, because businesses, everybody is going to have to be brought into this. And the question mark for us as a council is how are we going to pay and staff for that? The independent panel you've mentioned before the annual, the council, once in the council's term, the panel, who will appoint those? Do we appoint them as a council, or are they appointed by Welsh Government? My other question really is about the role of Welsh Audit in this, because Auditor General for Wales, it sounds very Cromwellian, that, doesn't it? Auditor General. And actually, I have fears that Welsh Government are going the way of Cromwell and dictating more. And we know what happened in Cromwell's time. Democracy disappeared in the end. And, you know, Auditor Generals would have been prolific at that time. But can I ask, what is going to be the role for the audit team, the Wales audit team? Will they still have a presence here with us? It doesn't say that in the document. If anything, it looks as if some of it will be moving away, you know, from the audit, Wales Audit Office as it was. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Martin. Yolo, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you. We would certainly expect Audit Wales to continue with, for example, sorry, yes, microphone in front of me. We would certainly expect Audit Wales to continue with their usual sort of annual program of field work that they conduct. So at the moment, for example, they would come in and look at waste in the context of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, as they did last year. So we would still expect that sort of ad hoc program to continue. There is less of a role well, there's certainly stipulated less of a role in terms of what they would look at in terms of overall council performance, which does present challenges. You know, we don't want to be in a situation where we submit our self-assessment to Audit Wales at the end of a year and they feel that we're not being entirely truthful or that there's more to it or something that they want to particularly look at. That's the sort of situation we need to avoid. We do and we will continue to have monthly meetings with Audit Wales. So that is very much our dialogue with them to assure them that, you know, the council is continuing to meet its obligations with regards to performance. But in the round, you know, the self-assessment work the corporate assessment that Audit Wales used to conduct, as best as I can make out, that will no longer apply. So looking at some of your other questions, the cost of new processes, such as, you know, implementing a new stakeholder survey, that is something that we are only just now starting to look at. I'm going to SLT tomorrow, in fact, to begin the process of where we are going to go with this annual stakeholder survey. How is it going to work? We would certainly be looking to not lump this on one particular aspect of the council. I think it's very much a job that needs to be shared out amongst services that have an interest. So, for example, the economic and business development team would want to have influence over the business aspect of any survey that we put out. There's a role for customer services there in terms of how we frame the question, how we promote it, how, you know, and then my team will have a particular interest in the analysis and the framing of the questions as well. So this is the long way of saying it will be subsumed within existing structures, but there is no way of not saying that that's additional work. And then the other question you were asking about the self-assessment, I'm less concerned about the additionality of the self-assessment, bizarrely, even though the responsibility for producing it will fall on my team. I am quite confident that this council has a very transparent reporting process throughout its core functions, that it will be easy enough for my team to pick up conclusions from existing reports and lump them in with some artistry into a self-assessment that is meaningful. But again, we're still at the early stages. We do need to design that process and how it would work. There is a technical solution that I'm considering, but that needs to be explored. I'm sorry, Martin, there was another question in the middle, but it's slipped my mind now.
I think actually, to be fair, Yolo, you answered some of my questions beforehand, so really I've just restated a point there. So yeah, thanks very much. The actual movement away from Wales Audit Office, that is concerning because I think best one in the world, those guys are trained auditors, they're specialist auditors, and you know, it's nice to have a panel from outside looking at things, but reality is, you know, auditors are auditors. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Anybody else wish to speak? Could I ask David from Welsh Audit, have you anything to add?
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't have a meeting invite. I've just got the meeting invite through now, so I've only just so I missed the bit, other than to hear something about auditors or auditors. So could I ask you to repeat that, please?
Sorry, David. I was saying that it appears that the ramifications of the new Local Government and Elections Wales bill is that Audit Wales will no longer be required to conduct the 5-year sort of corporate assessment that they previously held for authorities. Us now moving and relying on this panel assessment that's in place. Is my understanding right there?
Yeah, we haven't done corporate assessments for several years now. It's true, we did used to have a 5-year rolling cycle, but probably for about 3, 4, even 5 years now, we haven't done that. What we rely on now is what we call our assurance and risk assessment work, and that covers the range of functions that the council has, and we keep a watching brief on that as we go through the year, plugging gaps in knowledge that we might have. So yes, it is true. We won't be doing a 5-year rolling program of corporate assessments, and I believe the emphasis has moved on to self-assessments for yourselves. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Thanks, I would just add, obviously it's going to be a lot more work for your team, but I think there could be some positives as well come out of the assessments. Before we move on, what do you actually want from this committee, Yolo, moving forward?
Well, to be honest, I think I've already had it. It was really just to gauge your input on your feelings about the statutory guidance, and that, for a start, is all I require. The next steps will be as we develop the key aspects responding to the three parts that I've outlined, and we'll obviously be coming back to members for your input on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Yolo.
Thank you.
Okay, members, moving on then to agenda item number 6, which is to receive a report on the Local Government and Elections Wales Bill 2019. I think Gary is going to run through this for us. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can all see a set of slides.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, well, I promise it's not going to be death by PowerPoint, and I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. Effectively, what we've all been talking about, including myself, and I only changed the title of the slides this morning, is the bill. It was granted royal assent on Wednesday of last week, so it's now an act. So it's the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021. It was passed by the Senedd in November. As I said, royal assent was granted last week. The commencement provisions are staggered. So there are some provisions which will came into force last Wednesday. There were some that will come into force within 2 months of royal assent. There are others which will come into force on dates to be appointed by regulations made by the ministers. And there are other provisions which won't come into force until after the local government elections in May 2022. It's a broad-ranging act covering everything from electoral reform to collaborative working, democratic leadership, etc. Over 170 sections, numerous schedules, and what I've tried to distill into this presentation is just, if you like, the highlights or the headlines. There's a lot of technical stuff in the Act which we will have to work through, and we'll have to bring a number of papers probably to this committee and then to council over the next 12 to 18 months in order that we can make modifications as required to the Constitution and also that we can respond to the various elements of statutory guidance and regulation that we will inevitably be consulted upon. We've already been consulted upon the establishment regulations for corporate joint committees, which I'll come to later. YOLO's just brought you a paper on a consultation on statutory guidance relating to the performance of governance aspects. There are several other pieces of statutory guidance and regulation that will probably all have their own consultation process as well. So I've put the first 7 parts of the Act up on that slide. There are a couple more, but these are probably the most important ones. So in terms of electoral arrangements, the Act extends the voting franchise in local government elections to 16 and 17-year-olds and to what are called qualifying foreign citizens. So that's anybody who is a citizen of a foreign country but is legally resident in Wales will have the right to vote. That came into force when royal assent was granted. So in the next elections in May 2022, 16 and 17-year-olds and qualifying foreign citizens will be able to vote. There are other changes. So councils will be able to choose their own electoral system. So you will be able to retain the current first past the post system, or you would be able as a council to opt for the single transferable vote system. If you do that, that requires a full council decision. If you do it, you have to keep it for at least 2 election cycles, but you don't have to do it. And that doesn't come into force until after the next local government election. So if the next council wanted to do it, it could. The electoral cycle for councillors will formally change from 4 years to 5 years. It's been 5 years the last couple of times because the elections have been extended to fit in with other electoral timescales, but it will formally be changed to a 5-year cycle. Non-politically restricted council staff will be able to stand for election in their own authority, but they would have to resign if elected. At the moment, prior to the Act, you'd have to resign if you were employed by the council and you wanted to stand for election. You can now stand, but you'd have to resign if you won. And returning officers' fees for local government elections are being removed. So there'll be no separate personal payment to returning officers other than for expenses incurred. There are other technical changes around electoral registration, but I've just tried to keep it to the headlines at the moment. The next big thing in the Act is the general power of competence. Effectively, local authorities are what's called creatures of statute. They're created by a piece of legislation, so they can only therefore do that which the legislation specifically allows them to do. Whereas each of us, you may have your views about me, but I'd count as a natural person. We're all natural persons as far as the law is concerned. And what that means is that we can do anything we like, provided the law doesn't prohibit us from doing it. So there's a switch. What the general power of competence purports to do is to switch that balance for local authorities. So local authorities will be deemed to be able to do whatever they want to do, provided the law doesn't prohibit them from doing that. Now, this is heavily caveated. Local authorities won't be able to do anything under existing legislation that they're prohibited from doing, and it will be possible in future legislation to prohibit them from doing things as well. It also maintains the position that we can't charge for statutory services, which is obvious, but that any services that we do charge for, we can only cover costs, and that if we want to do things for a commercial purpose, we can only do so through a company. So that position hasn't changed. We would still have to create a company if we wanted to do anything for a commercial purpose. I think the evidence in England around the general power of competence in studies that have been done is that it's given people more confidence to be innovative and do different things, but actually you could probably find a root power somewhere that existed before the general power of competence that would enable you to do it. It's just having the general power makes people feel a bit more secure in doing those things. Public participation in local government. We will have a duty to encourage local people to participate in our decision-making processes, and we will have to produce a strategy to that effect, and we will have to consult on that strategy with the full cast list that YOLO mentioned in respect of the consultations around performance and governance. And we will have to do that in every electoral cycle. So we will have to do that once in every electoral cycle. The good news is that the bill, as originally drafted, required us to also do that for other public bodies, such as the Fire and Rescue Service, National Parks, town and community councils. It's now just for our own processes, but we will have a duty to draw up a strategy to that effect. We'll have a duty to make a petition scheme, including electronic petitions, and we will have to have arrangements in place for people to be able to formally lodge petitions with us. And we will have a duty to broadcast certain meetings. Now, as the bill was originally drafted, that was every public meeting unless they were exempted by regulation. The final version in the Act is that we must broadcast full council meetings and any other meetings which regulations subsequently say we must broadcast, so that there's a flip. It used to be you've got to broadcast, under the draft it was you broadcast everything unless we say you don't have to. Now it's you only have to broadcast council unless we by regulation say that you must broadcast certain meetings. It's highly likely regulations will be made to expand that list of meetings, and most councils do broadcast more than just their full council meeting as we do. There's greater flexibility around the remote attendance of members. So pre-COVID, the legislation allowed us to have remote attendance, but only if everybody could see and hear everybody else in the meeting, and only if 30% of the people present at the meeting were actually in one physical location together. The COVID regulations removed those requirements so that we can hold completely virtual meetings as we're doing now. And that's been retained in the Act. So going forward, we will be able to have the flexibility to have remote meetings without the quorum requirements of people being in one particular location. And we will also have a duty to publish electronically a document which explains in ordinary language the contents of the Constitution. There we are. Lawyers like constitutions to be in not quite so ordinary language because it's open to interpretation. But there we are. We're going to have a plain English guide to the contents of the Constitution. As I said, I've already run through this. In terms of attendance at meetings, there will be a set of statutory guidance from Welsh ministers, which we will be consulted upon, and which we will have to have regard in any arrangements we make. But I think the gist of the Act is that there's going to be sufficient flexibility to enable authorities to run meetings more or less how they like, from completely remote attendance to the flexibility of members being able to choose whether to attend remotely or not. And there is a requirement for community councils to allow the public to make representations at their meetings. Again, there'll be more clarity around that, presumably in either regulation or guidance. I know that some councils have sort of a public speaking time at the beginning of their meetings, but there will be a duty to allow the public to attend and make representations. Then there's a part of the Act that's called democratic governance and leadership. So if we start with chief executives, currently every local authority is required to have someone who is designated as the head of the paid service. Now, most of them are called chief executive. I think one or two may be called managing director. What the Act does is says that every council must have a person appointed to be their chief executive, and that title will apply, and that they will have specific duties to keep certain things under review and to advise the council on them. So that will be things like financial arrangements, risk management arrangements, resources, staffing, etc., etc. In terms of cabinets or executives, as they'll be referred to in the Act, our executive is called the cabinet. There are some changes. These are not required. It's not a requirement for us to do this, but there will be requirements for us to have arrangements in our constitution whereby we can do this if members decide they want to do it. So there are two main things here. The first is that the Act allows ministers to make regulations around job sharing for leaders and cabinet members, so that the arrangements that we have will have to make it possible for council, if they wish to elect more than one person to be leader. So you could elect joint leaders, and that where then the leader appoints a cabinet, the leader or joint leader would be able to appoint job shares to cabinet posts. Now, currently, the law says that we can have no more than 10 members of our cabinet. We currently have 8, but we could have up to 10 if we wish to. And what it says is that upper limit now will be extended to 13. However, any number over 10 must be because there are job shares. So if you took our cabinet of 8, we could potentially have up to 5 job shares to take it up to 13. So it's not a requirement to do that, but it's a requirement that our arrangements must enable that to happen if members choose to do that. And the other thing that has been introduced is the possibility to appoint elected members to be assistants to the cabinet. Now, again, there's going to be guidance and regulation around how that is supposed to work, but broadly, the arrangements in our constitution would have to enable a leader or joint leader to be able to appoint elected members to be an assistant to the cabinet. Now, with both of the job share and the assistants to the cabinet, there are a number of consequential changes. So, for example, an assistant to the cabinet will have the right to speak and attend at any meeting of the cabinet, including an informal meeting of the cabinet, but they don't get a vote. A job share cabinet member, if you have a job share, they have 1 vote between them, and they only count as 1 in the quorum, which I take to mean that they have to agree to vote the same way, otherwise they cancel each other out. So it's an abstention. And that if one of them is there, they count towards the quorum, and if both of them there, they only count as 1. But we'll get more clarity presumably later on. Assistants to the cabinet will not be able to sit on scrutiny committees. So I think the consequences for any consideration that the council would have to make in respect of job shares and assistants to the cabinet is the number of members who would be left who would be able to sit on scrutiny committees, and the workload that therefore would fall upon that other set of members. So I think the purpose behind this is to try and ease the workload on cabinet members, to give opportunities for elected members who may aspire to be on the cabinet to get some sort of experience through being an assistant to cabinet, etc. But clearly there would be consequences that we would have to consider in terms of availability of sufficient number of members to enable scrutiny to function effectively. The Welsh ministers will also have power to make regulations regarding job sharing of non-executive roles. So we could have a job share of chair of council, we could have a job share of various committees within the council, including scrutiny committees, etc. Again, we don't know the detail, but there will presumably be regulations at some stage enabling that to happen. And there will be an updating of the family absence provisions for members to make them more or less in line with those that apply to employees. And again, this would be by regulation. So things like carers leave, adoption leave, paternity, maternity, etc. It will be to make sure that members have access to the same sorts of absence allowance in terms of counting towards the automatic disqualification. If you miss 6 months worth of meetings, etc., it would mean that people would be able to have certain types of absence not counted. And there's also power for Welsh ministers to provide statutory guidance regarding equality and diversity to which leaders must have regard. Now, the reason I've mentioned this is that it specifically makes the point that leaders must have regard to it. So therefore, I am assuming that when we get it, it's going to say something about equality and diversity within cabinets, because leaders appoint cabinets. Otherwise, why would the leader have to have regard to it? So again, we don't know what it's going to say, but I'm expecting that it will say something along those lines. Then there are certain other duties that are introduced. So the leaders of political groups will have a statutory duty to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by members of their groups. And the Standards Committee will have to make an annual report to Council, which has to include an assessment of the extent to which group leaders are complying with that duty. So again, we will need to look at the guidance and the detail of that as it comes out, as to what exactly is expected of group leaders and exactly what sort of assessment Standards Committee will have to be doing. There will be a power for Welsh ministers to make regulations to require information to be provided to scrutiny before certain decisions can be made. So there are some provisions in England whereby a cabinet can't make a decision unless they've given sufficient advance notice of their intention to make decision. Depending on the decision is the length of the notice. So I think some decisions, for example, they have to give 3 months notice before they can make that decision. So there will be regulations, we will get to see them, but there may be some impact on forward planning in respect of decisions that are being made by the executive. And the other thing that Welsh ministers will have is the power to make regulations to require us to appoint a joint scrutiny committee. So at the moment, we have the power to appoint a joint scrutiny committee should we and another council or councils wish to do so. And we have done with Conway in respect of the Public Service Board Scrutiny Committee. There will be the power for Welsh ministers to make regulations to say, well, thou shalt have a joint scrutiny committee on this subject or this topic with another authority. It doesn't mean that they will do it, but they do have the power to do it. Collaborative working, there will be statutory guidance produced by Welsh ministers about collaborative working, so we will have to have regard to that. And there are powers, as members are already aware, because we've been to members in an informal briefing around corporate joint committees. There are two elements to corporate joint committees. Two or more councils can go to Welsh ministers and say, we would like to have a corporate joint committee in respect of function X. And Welsh ministers could, by regulation, allow that to happen. In practice, that would be to add a function to an existing corporate joint committee, because they are going to mandate corporate joint committees in certain circumstances. So they have also given themselves power to establish corporate joint committees for the 4 functions of economic well-being, transport, strategic planning, and school improvement. And they've consulted on what they call establishment regulations for the creation of those committees, which they can, by regulation, make without the consent of the local authorities concerned. They're considering the outcome of that consultation exercise at the moment. So there may be some movement in respect of some aspects of those regulations. And there will be further regulations called regulations of general application, which will give more detail about how corporate joint committees are going to work. At the moment, the proposal in the draft regulations is that they can meet after the 1st of April this year, but that there must be a meeting of a corporate joint committee by the end of September. I know that some authorities, including this authority, have made representations about timescale, and clearly government will presumably be considering that. So we'll see the final version when they've completed that work. Performance and governance. Again, Yolo has run through this, so I don't intend to say much about the self and panel assessment or the stakeholder survey. But there are reforms to audit committees. Now, this committee is the audit committee for the council. The Act says that the audit committee will have to be renamed the Governance and Audit Committee. The original draft would require it to be called the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, and we think we were clever when we formally changed the name in the Constitution to that, only to see the final version drop the word corporate. So we'll just have to take soundings as to whether or not we have to change the name. More importantly, there will be a change to the prescribed membership and chairing arrangements for the committee. So currently, we're required to have an audit committee, and it must have at least 1 lay member on it. It can be chaired by a member of the committee, provided they're not a member of a group that's represented on the cabinet. That will change under the Act on a date to be appointed, which we think may be after the next election in May 2022, but that's not necessarily been confirmed yet. That the committee will have to have 1/3 of its membership comprising of independent lay people, and that the chair of the committee must be one of those independent lay people and cannot be an elected member. So that's in the Act, so it will become the law, but it will become the law on a date appointed by ministers in regulation. And as again, the intelligence we have at the moment is that that's likely to be after the next local government election. So again, we will have to recruit independent lay members and make the relevant changes to our constitution. There is also an additional function to be granted to audit committees, which is that they will be required to review the arrangements that the council has to deal with complaints effectively. As you all have said, the Auditor General for Wales will be able to carry out what's called a special inspection if the Auditor General considers that a council is not or may not be meeting the performance requirements. Welsh ministers can also request that the Auditor General conduct a special inspection. And where that happens, Welsh ministers can provide support or assistance to a council undergoing that, or it could direct another council to provide support and assistance to a council that needs support. So, for example, a council that's not in difficulties could be directed by Welsh ministers to provide support and assistance to a council that is. Welsh ministers will also have power to intervene by direction to take specific steps, or even to direct that a function be discharged by themselves or their nominee. So this is quite serious. You'd have to be in quite serious position for this to happen, but they do have the power to direct that they discharge a function rather than the authority, or that their nominee could, which may, I'm assuming, include another local authority. There are consequences potentially to a special inspection, which I'll come to in a minute. But first of all, just in terms of the part of the Act that deals with mergers and restructuring, voluntary mergers still exist. So the ability of two or more councils to approach Welsh ministers to say, we would like to be merged, please merge us by regulation still exists. And Welsh ministers would be able to make regulations, and they would have to deal with all of the technical things like shadow authority and boundary arrangements and all that sort of stuff. And then they also have the power to make restructuring regulations if they're satisfied it's necessary for effective and convenient local government. Now, they can only do that if either they receive a special inspection report from the attorney, I keep calling him the Attorney General, that's the lawyer in me, I do apologise, the Auditor General. If a special inspection report suggested that things were such that Welsh ministers thought that the best way to deal with it would be by restructuring the authority, or an abolition request from a council. So you may or may not be pleased to know that you will be able to request to abolish yourselves. So a council can go to Welsh ministers to say, please abolish us. And if they receive an abolition request, then they would be able to make restructuring regulations, or if they wanted to, which would either break up that authority or would merge that authority with another authority. So it's a means by which there could be a local government restructure. Again, there would have to be all sorts of consultation, etc., in respect to that, but that power will exist. I have flown through all of that a little bit. As you can imagine, there's an awful lot more detail behind a lot of this, but it was just really to give you a heads up of the sorts of things that are coming down the track. There will be a lot, I think, in the next 12 months of activity and consultation around the various aspects of the Act as they are commenced, and there will probably be a number of consultation exercises. So I think we're going to have to draw up an action plan and timetable of when we think these things are likely to happen. We do get lots of good information from colleagues at WLGA who are in dialogue with government about these things. And we are considering, one of the things I wanted to ask the committee's view on, considering trying to set up an officer member working group just to have oversight of the implementation of the Act, just to make sure that we're making all of the appropriate changes to our constitution, and that we've got some sort of steer in terms of how we deal with various consultation exercises. Some of them will be very technical in nature and may not need a great deal of member input. Some of them will be potentially quite political in nature and will need, obviously, an awful lot more of member input. So we think if we can get an officer member group set up, I haven't sorted the terms of reference or membership of that out yet, but we will have some sort of body that will be trying to steer us through the process. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Put us on there. Thank you, Gary, for running us through that. I think it's the third time I've heard it, and it's still interesting. As you see, members, there's a great lot there to take in and digest, and I think it's a great suggestion, Gary, of getting a officer member working group together. And as you say, the timescales on this are a bit ridiculous. So members, I'm opening the floor up to you. First of all, can I ask Martin?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, although we've all heard this a number of times, Gary, I must admit, as I read through the papers again and again and then listen to you, it raises even more questions. I did recall something that I did ask Iolo, and it's probably pertinent to this as well. But the external panel that will do the assessment in a 5-year term, who will appoint that panel? That's the first question, because they are appointed, they're not elected. So just if somebody could clarify that for me, it would be great. I've got a number of other points here. It's good to hear that members of the public will be able to attend and ask questions, and the 3 community councils in my ward already do this. For example, they have a slot at the beginning of the meeting, 10 minutes, where members of the public can come and raise things. And as a county council, we also do that, to be fair, because people can have a written question and then come and read that question. I'm just wondering, though, if this becomes a big issue, how do we control that? Because normally most people will come to their county councillor and ask them to take something forward for them. If it becomes the norm, then our full council meetings and other meetings could be a lot longer. Would we have time limits on that, for example? Then there's the question of the issue at the statement which you covered and I'd read before, requiring political group leaders to promote and maintain high standards of conduct of members of their groups. I'm all in favour of that, and as Tony probably will tell you, we do have regular discussions about the do's and don'ts. But will there be consequences for the group leaders if somebody does something that they don't know about? You know, that's a bit concerning, because there's an emphasis on there that they've got a role to play in doing this, but it doesn't say whether there's consequences, and would the auditors pick that one up and deal with that one. The only other comment I would make, oh yes, abolition of councils. Do the electorate not have any say in that? If we decided to abolish our council just like that, where do the electors have a say in that? I know electors, I think at the moment, can petition, can't they, to abolish a council if they feel that's the case. But for the council just to abolish itself without consulting the electorate seems a bit strange. And finally, one of the things, obviously, we are increasing the franchise, the voter franchise in this by including 16-year-olds, which is grand. I have no problem with that. But we seem to be then appointing more people to various bodies. And when you look at the CJC committees, a large number of those people on those regional councils, if you want to put it that way, will be appointed. Also, you know, our external panels will be appointed, and also corporate governance will have a high number of appointed people. So on one hand, we're extending the franchise, but on the other hand, we're actually putting more appointed people in rather than elected people to many of these bodies. Thank you.
Okay, Martin. Gary, do you want to come back on some of them points?
Yeah, sure, Barry. I think my understanding in respect of the panel is that the duty is for the local authority to arrange the panel assessment, but there will be regulations about how that's to be done, and I'm assuming that there'll be guidance about how that's to be done, and we would have to have regard to that. You know, I mean, if you take ridiculous scenarios, clearly it will have to stop councils picking their mates to tell them that they're doing a really good job, to put it crudely. So there will obviously be some structure and some criteria around that. And my assumption is that they will have to be suitably experienced people, and there will be guidance about that, how that's to run. In respect of group leaders, it's not clear. It just says that there will be a statutory duty for group leaders to promote and maintain high standards of conduct within their group, and that the standards committee must monitor that and must publish an assessment of how that's to be done. There's no mention of sanction, effectively. Now, clearly, there will have to be some consideration about and guidance about, well, exactly what does that duty mean? Does it mean that once a year you tell everybody to behave well, thank you very much, or is it more than that? And there will need to be, I think, some liaison and dialogue between group leaders and standards committees as to, you know, issues or themes that they need to keep an eye on, etc. So I suspect we'll get guidance in respect of what that's to look like, but we don't have that yet. It doesn't seem, for example, in terms of sanction, I haven't seen anything yet that says, oh, and this will be added to the code of conduct. So if a group leader doesn't do it, they'll be in breach of the code of conduct. I haven't seen anything like that. And this, again, is a standalone statutory duty. So it will be interesting to see what the guidance tells us, the extent of it is, and what can happen. So it's probably a very long rambling way of saying I don't know. In terms of abolition, the Act is very bold. It just says that a council can make an abolition request. I can't imagine that a council would do that without going through some form of consultation exercise. And I would have thought that by the time a council got to that position, there would have been an awful lot of debate, discussion, and public consultation around it. But the Act is quite bold. It just says, you know, a council can do that. I'm sure there will be regulations and guidance in respect of what the process would have to be, but I'm not sure what that is yet. In terms of the point about the increasing number of appointees and elected, yes, there is a certain trend. So I think in terms of the audit committee provisions, I think they would suggest that effectively they were making them look a little bit more like the standards committee provisions. So for example, they're not as biased towards appointees as the standards committee provisions are. So for example, the standards committee must always have a majority of independent members, and it must always be chaired by an independent lay member. The proposals for audit committees are that a third of the committee would be independent lay members, and that the chair would be independent. I think the response we make in respect of corporate committee is that what they've granted is the flexibility to appoint people, not a requirement to appoint people. So a corporate joint committee will at its core have a minimum membership of the leaders of the relevant authorities. It will be up to them to decide whether or not to co-opt other people on there. It just gives them the power to do it, I think is the answer. Now, there may well be rafts of guidance that come along and say, and that's a jolly good idea, but the law just gives them the power to do it rather than a requirement to do it.
Thanks, Gary. Okay.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
But Gary, you were breaking up there during that. I don't know if you realised, because we were all going like this.
Oh.
I'm not quite sure whether it's something to do with your mic, but just to let you know.
Okay, I might turn my camera off. I wasn't sure when you do that whether you can't hear me or you just don't like what I'm saying.
No,
But,
can't hear. Can't hear.
Okay.
Thanks, Martin.
Either that or we're all suffering from old age.
Looking around the room, I'll say nothing. Tony Flynn, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me. I just wanted to clarify with you about the lay members chairing meetings. Gary, did you mean that all our committees that we currently have would have lay members replace councillors?
No.
No. Oh, good.
No,
Okay,
no.
good.
It's
good.
very specific. So the law. Sorry, can you hear me?
Good. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
good.
The law requires currently, before this act, that the Standards Committee has to be chaired by an independent layperson.
Right. Yeah.
What this act does is says that the Audit Committee will have to have an independent lay chair. It doesn't apply to any of our other committees. It's just to
okay.
the Audit Committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Tony.
Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you. Paul, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Gary for his presentation. And as perhaps currently one of only 22 people in Wales, it's not lonely with you lot, it's brilliant. But I just thought I just thought I'd make the offer to contribute whenever and whatever ways you deem appropriate in your deliberations for the changes that are upcoming. If I can help in any way, just let me know. Whether that's a briefing paper or some personal reflections, personal experiences, or even being part of this officer member working group. I just throw that offer into the ring to help.
Harry, answer that. Thank you, Paul.
Yes, thanks very much, Paul. Again, we're working up what our arrangement's going to be, but I think that it may be, if there's going to be an extension of the role of independent lay members, that there would be some value in us holding some sort of event at some time, a little as we do with before elections, where we have a sort of a roadshow where we invite people who are thinking of standing for election to come and learn a bit more about the role. That maybe the experience of people who've been an independent lay member of an audit committee would be useful to be able to relate to people who might be thinking about it but may get put off because they don't know enough about it, but giving them some experience like the role entails, etc. I think that would be really important.
I mean, I'd not deliberately try to put them off. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Any other members before I bring in members that are outside the committee? No? Okay. I'll bring on then Merrick.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr. Cadeirydd. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Hefyd, ga i ddiolch i Iolo am ei gyflwyniad i adran 5. A wedyn dod i adran 6. Wan, diolch i Gary am gyflwyniad ardderchog fathag arfer. Ac am atodiad 1, mae wedi gafal bob dim diweddaru'r cynghorwyr gynnig ac mae o'n gynhwysfawr iawn. Allan o ddeithau, a yw yr ddeddf wan yn ddeddf neu bil? Mae pennawd yr adroddiad yn deud bil, ond os da chi'n deud bod ti wedi dod yn ddeddf, dwi'n cymryd bod ti'n ddeddf, ond allwch chi adael mi wybod wedyn. Diolch i Paul am ei sylwadau. Mae Paul i mi wedi dangos ei hun yn aelod gwerthfawr iawn i'r Pwyllgor, a dwi'n ei gamol am hynny. Un llithriad dyma bod Gary wedi wneud ydy, dwi'n meddwl o ddeud plain English, ond dwi'n siŵr bod wedi golygu Cymraeg dealladwy hefyd, dwi'n siŵr. Ydy'r ddeddf ar y funud i'w chael yn y Gymraeg gan y Llywodraeth y Cynulliad, y Senedd, mae'n ddrwg gynna i. Tudalen 62, gweithio ar y cydbwyllgorau corfforaethol, dwi'n cymryd bod na dalfyriad Cymraeg i hwnna, tydi o ddim yn yr adroddiad, CJCS sy'n yr adroddiad mewn cromfachau, yn yr un Cymraeg dwi'n dweud wan. Felly dwi'n cymryd bod na dalfyriad Cymraeg. Ac yr ola un ydy, oes modd cael rhestr clir o beth sy'n nawr yn weithredol yn y ddeddf, a beth sydd i gael i wneud yn y blynyddoedd i ddod. Ydych chi wedi sôn, ond i sy'n neud o'n glir pa rannau ydy pa. Ddim wan, ddim yn disgwyl chi ddeithau rwan, ond i ni gael rhestr, fas o'n gymorth yn meddwl i ni gyd.
OK, wel, diolch Meirig am y cwestiwn. Mi oedd o'n bil pan am i sgwennu'r adroddiad, ond mewn ddeddf, mae wedi gael, dwi'n gwybod y gair iawn, ond dwi'n meddwl caniatad frenhinol. Mae wedi gael y caniatad frenhinol wsos diwetha, so mewn ddeddf rwan. Dwi'n ymddiheuro ynglyn â'r llythiad iaith gyffredin, un Saesneg neu Gymraeg, di'r pwynt. Y dalferiad, dwi'n yn hollol siŵr, dwi'n di ddarllen y fersiwn Gymraeg, ond os i'n dweud rhywbeth fel cydbwyllgor corfforaethol neu rhywbeth fel yna, na i checio'r fersiwn Gymraeg. Ynglyn â'r amserlen o pan mae wahanol materion yn dod i fiewn i'r gyfraith, mi fydd ni'n neud y gwaith yna i trio sbio trwy pob adran o'r deddf ac yn trio gael mor gymaint o wybodaeth a fedrwn ni gan y Llywodraeth o pryd maen nhw'n meddwl fydd pethau'n dod ymlaen. Mae amser da ni angen gael i weithredu rhai o'r pethau yma. Fydd ni gofod cymryd pethau trwy y pwyllgor yma a'r cyngor llawn i wneud newidiadau i'r cyfansoddiad. Mi fydd ni gofod recrwtio bobl annibynnol i eistedd ar y pwyllgor. So, dwi'n meddwl os mae'r newidiadau i'r pwyllgor yma yn aros tan ar ôl yr etholiad nesaf, mae gennym ni ddigon o amser, ond da ni jyst eisiau gael rhyw fath o sbio dros y deddf i gyd i weld lle mae pethau'n dod i fiewn i'r gyfraith, a fy ni'n dwi'n gofyn wneud y gwaith, so na i rhannu fo efo aelodau pan dwi wedi wneud o, just i setio allan pob dim.
Thanks, Gary. OK, Meirig?
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd, diolch yn fawr, Gary.
Thank you. If I ask Bobby Feely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Gary for the presentation. Just 4 short questions, Gary. One is to do with the 16 and 17-year-olds to be able to vote in local elections. Can they also stand in local elections? Just a question. The other question about encouraging people to participate and, in terms of standing for election. I'll give an example of Ruthin Town Council. Last time they had a co-option, they had 5 amazingly good candidates who tried for it. And it was just the town council that decided it. It didn't go out for election. I wondered if that was being tackled in this bill. And when you talk about there being a joint leader of a cabinet, does that mean there would be a joint deputy leader as well? Or would that mean there wouldn't need to be a deputy leader? And final question is, I think I heard you say that you can't be a member of a political group which forms the cabinet if to chair a meeting, this meeting. What if it was a sort of rainbow cabinet where, everybody all parties took part in it? In other words, similar to the cabinet we had when I first was in the cabinet, where it was, 3 or 4 parties across the council. That's my questions. Thank you, Gary. Oh, and by the way, Yolo, you've gone from civil servant to rock star in the lockdown.
Oh, thanks, Bobby. Gary, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I've just got bolder during lockdown. The answers to the questions are, can they also stand? 16 and 17-year-olds, I will check that for you. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, if I'm being perfectly honest. In terms of the encouraging participation, it's not really just around standing for election. The duty to encourage participation is about getting people to want to get involved in our processes. So when we're making decisions, how do we involve the public? What do we what opportunities do they have to get involved in it? Maybe things like being able to ask questions at meetings, etc. We don't know. We're going to be given guidance on what those public participation strategies are. At the moment, it just says public participation. So until we get the guidance, we won't have any more detail. The issue around co-option, the law around that is that where a vacancy occurs on a council, a city, town or community council, they must publish notice of that vacancy. And if sufficient number of electors indicate that they would like an election to happen, then an election must happen.
Yeah, I know what happens now.
Yeah.
I know that happens now, but
Yeah.
I think it's very wrong. And I wondered if this bill or law, whatever it is, would change that.
No, I don't think it does. What it does do, though, is that I probably missed this out in my presentation, so I do apologise. The general power of competence will be available to what are going to be called eligible community councils. Now, when they first consulted upon this way back when, they called them competent community councils, and of course that kicked off because it tended to suggest that if you weren't a competent community council, you must be an incompetent one. That's not quite what they meant by the word, but that's what the reaction was. So the general power of competence will be available to principal councils and to eligible community councils. Eligible community councils will be community councils who have a professionally accredited clerk. Don't have details of what that means yet, but they will have to have some form of recognised qualification. That they have a clean set of accounts, so they have a clean audit opinion in respect to their accounts, and that at least 2/3 of the members of the town council have actually been elected rather than co-opted. So there will be some incentive on those councils, if they want to have a general power of competence, that they seek to ensure that they have as many elected members as possible. But it doesn't get rid of co-option, because for many councils, co-option can sometimes be the only way of actually getting people onto the council.
Okay, Bobby.
Oh, sorry, chairing.
No, there's one left.
Yeah, deputy leader. Sorry. Essentially, the detail isn't in the Act, but on the basis that we have to have arrangements to enable there to be a joint leader, and we have to have arrangements whereby that joint leader can appoint job shares to cabinet positions. It seems to me logical that it would be perfectly possible to appoint a joint deputy leader. But of course, that won't be a requirement. It will just be an option that councils will be able to take up. In terms of chairing of meetings, so the rules around chairing really apply to scrutiny committees, in that there's a formula by which the number of chairs that are applied to various groups has to be worked out. That was in the Local Government Wales Measure 2011, and that will remain, as far as I understand it. The other rule is around currently the chair of the audit committee cannot be a member of a group on cabinet unless every group is represented on cabinet. So if you had a rainbow cabinet of all the groups, then the committee could choose any member currently to be the chair, but where not every group is represented on the cabinet, they can only choose a member who is not part of a group that's on cabinet. When we think after the next election it's going to come in, but when the new rule comes in, it will be that only an independent lay member can be the chair of this particular committee.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. Final one I've got is Ellie Chard.
As always, I'm just a bit concerned, everybody, about the reduction of scrutiny members if job shares were on cabinet. So that's my big concern. Okay, and I'm sure it's everybody else's, but that's just something really sad, because it'd be awful, you know, going to, like me tomorrow, going to performance scrutiny and there's not as many members there to have a real good discussion about these items we have to discuss. So it's the number of scrutiny if we had more on the cabinet. So that's my concern. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's just to make clear that it's not a requirement that we do it. It's just a requirement that we have arrangements where we can do it if we want to.
Yeah.
And clearly, it seems to me that for effective scrutiny, that would be a consideration that the council and the leader would have to take into account should they want to go down this route of to what extent does it cause difficulties for the discharge of scrutiny functions?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Gary. I don't see any other hands. Julian, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to hog your meeting, but it's just a very quick question, which actually just playing devil's advocate almost, and it came across my mind as Gary was speaking. Obviously, the intention of having on this committee more lay members, I understand the principle behind that, and we've been very fortunate, in the contributions that Paul has made over the time. But if we're going to have more lay members on, and we're going to compel one of them to take a chair, could that not actually put people off standing? And what does the law say if we're unable to find that number of lay members? Does that invalidate having a committee?
Yeah, I haven't really thought that one through. What it currently says is that we must have 1/3. Sorry, when I say currently, what the Act says needs to happen is that the audit committee will have to have, and it's expressed in definite terms. It's not expressed in at least X amount. It says it will be 1/3 independent lay members and 2/3 elected members. Now, clearly, what we need to understand, and probably will understand better as we get regulation and guidance, is what is the impact on the validity of the committee where we carry a vacancy. So, for example, we're in the very sad situation at the moment that the council has a vacancy because of the untimely death of Councillor Hugh Jones. But that doesn't invalidate the proceedings of the council because we have one vacant seat. We can have committees that have vacant seats and they can still continue. What we would need to understand would be what the quorum requirements would be. So, for example, if the committee has to have 1/3 of its membership as independent lay members, what happens if they're all ill on the day of a particular committee? Does that invalidate the committee? Are we able to hold the meeting? There are quorum rules for standards committees in the regulations for standards committees. So we're not quorate in standards committee if the number of elected members there outnumbers the number of independent members there. So I've worked at an authority where we had to send an elected member home one day because the numbers on that committee meant that all the elected members turned up and a couple of the independents couldn't be there. So we had to send an elected member home to restore the majority of independent members. So we will get more detail, I'm sure, as things come through, but the clear requirement is that we have to have 1/3 and we have to have a chair. I understand what you say about the chairing. Clearly, we don't know what the remuneration position yet will be in respect of that, because clearly at the moment, the council allocates a senior salary to the chair of the audit committee. There's nothing in the Act about what the remuneration of the independent chair would be. I'm assuming that it would be similar to the independent chair of standards committees, which is that they get a daily rate like co-opted members of scrutiny. But again, all of that detail is yet to come. The purpose of this really is just to try and set out for you what the sort of bird's eye view of the Act is and the sorts of things that we're going to have to deal with over the coming period.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Julian. I don't see any other members' hands. Gary, as far as the officer member working group, do you want this committee to vote on that? That's a good idea to take forward.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Yes, that would be fine. That would be fine. I don't think it's necessary because I think I've clearly got the mood of the meeting. They think that would be a good idea, and it was scrutiny chairs felt that it would be a good idea as well. What we'll just need to do is to work up what that might look like, how often it might need to meet, and what its role would be. But we will get those arranged, and we'll consult on that before we do it. So I'm sure that we'll be in touch with group leaders and others. The issue would be, do we do it by role within the council? So do you say that certain roles within the council need to be represented on there, such as yourself as chair of this committee, scrutiny chair, lead member, etc.? Or do we do it just purely on a ask the groups to nominate a certain number of members each, or a political balance, or a geographical spread? I haven't worked all that through yet, but we will need to set up a group, I think. It would be fairly light touch. It would just to keep an oversight to make sure that we're not missing anything, and that we make sure that we're taking soundings about how we proceed with certain consultations and other things.
I'm sure members are all happy with that, yeah?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just one quick comment. The proof of the pudding of this bill will be when we actually get the guidance, because that's key to all of this. As Gary's rightly said, we haven't had guidance on this, we haven't had guidance on that, and the guidance will be the proof of the pudding. It's a shame that we're going to have to wait for that to see what the Welsh Government really mean by a lot of these things. Thank you.
Okay, members, thank you very much. Thank you, Gary. Obviously, there's a lot of work going to go on in the next few months. Moving on then to agenda item number 7, which is challenge and intervention framework for schools in financial difficulty. To receive a report, copy attached, pages 77 to 124, on the progress of the implementation of the challenge and intervention framework for schools in financial difficulty. Is Craig leading on this?
Chair, I think I was just going to do it. I don't think Hugh Hilditch Roberts is present, is he? Haven't seen him. So I think because this is a joint report, obviously from Hugh and myself, because it covers our 2 portfolio areas. So I was just going to do a very quick introduction before handing over to officers, if that's all right.
Yes, no problem, Julian.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Just to give a bit of background, and I'm not going to go through everything that's in the report. We'll deal with that as we go through it. But just to give a quick summary, currently as an authority, Denbighshire delegates approximately 85% of its schools budget directly to schools. And schools are required to provide a 3-year budget to the authority. Now, clearly, at times, some schools will face issues, and we as the local authority and local education authority are empowered under the relevant acts to license a deficit, provided that we have that 3-year business plan indicating how the school is actually going to get itself from a deficit into a positive situation. As part of this, we developed what I think was a pretty significant challenge process with a number of escalation points within that. We came to corporate governance with that back in November 2017. And it's attached as Appendix 1 in your reports. But I think probably the flow chart, which is, at least on my pack, I think is on page 83, is probably one of the key areas to show how we move through each of the escalation areas depending on individual school circumstances. In terms of our financial investment within schools, I'm sure you're all aware that for a number of years, Welsh Government had in place a protection scheme, for want of a better word. But actually, as you'll see from the report, over that period, we actually invested more in our schools than would have been if we just followed the strict mandating from Welsh Government. And some of the areas that we've obviously now put into the settlement. Can you hear me? Because I'm getting feedback on my end of my own voice, which is not a pleasant thing, I'm sure.
Yes, I can hear you, Julian.
There's a bit of
okay. Thank you. I'll
hear you, Julian.
Okay, I'll continue, and if I need to, I'll turn my camera off. So some of the areas that are now incorporated are transferring into, allowing for pay and inflationary costs, We allow for increases in demography. So as school numbers increase, we increase the budget accordingly. We passport all external funding across. And we have expected, in line with the other services within the council, although at a lower level, that schools find efficiency savings towards the overall budget. And obviously, we were at council yesterday, and we agreed the budget. So, in terms of that, for the coming year, there's further investment of around about £3.4 million, less a 1% efficiency saving, which is around about 733,000. So there's still a significant number of additional funding that's actually going into the school's delegated budget, which is represents about a 2.5% uplift. In terms of our current position with schools, the projected deficit balance across all schools now we're projecting is around about £1.6 million, which has increased by around about £200,000 from the figure that we started the financial year with, which, considering COVID and all the rest of the pressures that's been faced, actually isn't a too bad of a position. In terms of schools that do find themselves, unfortunately, in financial difficulty, we have a well-established process in place, which actually means that both finance and education officers are working on a termly basis with those schools. The relevant heads of service, Geraint and Steve, meet regularly with finance and education colleagues to go through the position to make sure that those business cases that say how a school is working through the process of getting out of the financial difficulties are progressing. Currently, we have 18 schools which are classified as schools in financial difficulty. 12 of those have licensed deficits and the plan for getting out of that in place, and are proceeding along that, and we have no additional causes for concern on those. And the remaining 6 are in the process of developing that scenario. Clearly, schools will come in and come out at different times, but that's the snapshot figure as we have them at the moment. So I think all I wanted to say now, I think we do have a pretty effective process. The fact that we haven't had to escalate many, if any, to the ultimate sanction levels higher up the escalation process probably would intend that these things are actually working reasonably well. But obviously, we're here to update members on where we are and receive any comments. I don't know whether Steve wanted to add anything before I hand over to Craig to go through a bit more detail.
Yeah, Julian, sorry, I just crashed out and had to log back in, so I just caught the very end of what you said. So normally in these instances, you've covered everything I want to say, and I apologise, I'm not going to try and even put the camera on because it's obviously not working at the moment. I've got 2 kids and a teacher and me all trying to access the internet at the same time, so it's I'm struggling a bit. I'll just highlight very much the things that I wanted to highlight, really. And I won't go through the process and stuff because I don't know what Julian's covered already. It is the report's fairly self-explanatory. It just goes through the background and the sort of the difference in roles between us and the governing bodies. We as a council have set the overall budget for schools, and then it's up to the school governing body to develop the detailed budgets. This process is around monitoring that process, really, and making sure that nothing falls through. We monitor schools in detail, and it's reported in summary to Cabinet on a monthly basis. So, if you ever want an update, the position is reported to Cabinet every month, and the full details are reported to Cabinet, which is the Appendix 3. In your report is the actual final outturn details, and that's reported obviously once a year. There is obviously a difficulty that actually, we want the very latest information from schools, and sometimes that means that we get the information You know, problems are flagged up to us maybe a couple of days before governing bodies. So it's very important that we don't publish information on detailed schools unless the governing body themselves have been informed as well. So that's why we don't report on a monthly basis for each school, because it's important that they go to the termly governing body meetings with the full details of each, the finances for each schools. Yeah, I mean, I on a personal basis, I think this process is working really well. My team, led by Craig and Kathy, they do a huge amount of work with schools, and sort of me and Geraint, who sends his apologies, he couldn't attend today. But me and Geraint then work with on all that detail that Craig and the schools develop with those 3-year business plans. Myself and Geraint then have a meeting with Craig and Kathy to go through and highlight and agree the approach for each of those individual schools. And we do that on a termly basis. And sometimes that will involve us actually meeting the schools. Sometimes it's just, yes, we'll agree the actions, but we do go through in detail on that termly basis. And and that process is really good. The other thing I just wanted to highlight is that recent activity and current position. So the budget strategy that we've changed from, you may remember in recent years, and apologies if I'm repeating what Julian has said, but I'll say I didn't hear that bit. So the budget strategy is that we're trying to treat schools more in line with our services instead of previously the Welsh Government had this 1% target, which to be honest was less than we gave them. But we've tried to give them a bit of assurance, because we don't get 3-year figures from Welsh Government, 3-year figures for the revenue support grant. It's very difficult for us to then give assurances to schools on a 3-year basis, and yet schools have to develop 3-year plans. So there is a bit of a mismatch there. So what we've tried to do is give them a bit of assurances around how they can plan. So we commit to giving them a pay and price inflation increase. We commit to give them, and obviously this is subject to democratic choice as well, but this is, you know, how we try to manage it. We commit to giving them a demographic adjustment, and in recent years that's been quite a significant increase every year. We also passport any transfers in. So if Welsh Government passport a grant into RSG, we always passport that funding to schools. If it's a schools related grant, we don't top slice it or anything like that. It goes direct to schools. We do consider any strategic pressures, which we'll highlight for this financial year, 2 of them. But we do ask for efficiency savings target. In previous years, that's been as high as 2%. And in recent years, it's gone down to 1%, which and we go through all this with schools budget forum throughout the year. I attend schools budget forum for a section on the wider school budget. You know, the corporate side, and they can ask any questions, and so they're aware of any progress. I went on Monday for the latest, I think it was Monday, wasn't it? For the latest on the budget proposals, which if I just highlight below, so again, we've increased the pressures for inflation, so that's the 1.2 million, slightly lower than usual, and that's because of the expected pay restraint, particularly on non-teachers' salaries. It's come through the SIFD process really, and the school budget forum process, that there has been an ongoing call for additional funding to help schools with additional learning needs. So that's been recognised, and that's a calculation that Craig, Joyce and Mary Gaskell have worked on together, and that was talked about in detail at school budget forum this week as well. And that's purposely to try and help them with the additional requirements that schools have had to meet as far as additional learning needs. And secondly, we've also invested in the quantum for small school sustainability, and this is around really recognising the change in position on small schools, whereas 7 years ago, you know, we were getting pressure from Welsh Government to modernise, to rationalise our school portfolio. Spare places was a premium as there's some high profile, and I won't mention the ones that Denbighshire have had to go through over recent years. That's not there now. That pressure isn't there with the current setup in Welsh Government. So if we are going to continue with small schools, we need to make sure that they're financially sustainable and not set up to fail, really. So that funding is aimed to help them. And it's really, you know, in the grand scheme of things, a small amount of money can really help small schools, because, you know, that obviously, as far as, you know, when you compare it to the problems with some of the secondary schools, that it's small in total amount, but it's really important for that school. Because sometimes they can get to a stage where they actually can't make any more savings. You know, they're down to the minimum level of staff. They can't change their building. They can't, you know, sometimes it's just those are the costs that are needed to run a small school. So that's that funding. Demographic pressure is 718. Again, a transfer in teachers' pay grant from Welsh Government that we came in this year. That's been put into RSG, and then the 1% efficiency target. Yeah, and I think probably I heard from the end that I think Julian covered our current position with the amount of schools in SIFD at the moment and how we're working with them. So I won't cover that. The only thing just to highlight is that the main part of the process, it says page 3 in the report, and it's page 3 of the scheme, but it's actually 83 in your pack. So if you want to just have a quick look at the flow chart, that's the sort of the main flow chart that we use as a sort of ready reckoner of where schools could possibly be in the process and how the process works. So that's the key chart to look at. Craig, I don't know whether you want to add anything at this stage, or Craig's here to hopefully answer any detailed questions that you might have. But
no, I think that pretty much covers everything. Like Steve said, our role is we go in termly, so myself and meet with schools 3 times a year, meet with the head, the chair, the governors, and we basically just go through in detail what their plan is, you know, their pupil numbers, because, you know, in the majority of occasions, the common denominator with all these schools, not all, but the majority, is falling roles. So it's going through the staffing lists, you know, what they can manage with, you know, and in some cases, as you'll be aware, there's a lot of secondary schools in deficit. So that's quite a time-consuming process to go through, you know, staffing for a school with 1,200 pupils, for example. So yeah, it's basically just to let you know it's in hand. The process is ongoing, as Steve and Julian have already said. Extra ALN funding has just been agreed, you know, totaling 1.2 million. So I haven't done the school budgets yet. They will go out probably in the next 10 to 14 days. And once they do go out, they will start working with the new figures, you know, and there's some significant increases to several schools who are in the SIFD process because of ALN difficulties. You know, obviously 600k for each sector is a lot of money. So, you know, we're moving forward. We'll have our next round of meetings in March, April time, because we've got to meet with 18 schools, and then take it from there, really. But yeah, just to let you know that it is being looked at and it's in hand, really.
Thank you. Thank Julian, Steve and Craig. Members, have you any questions? Don't see any hands up. I've got Mabon.
Bore da, ydy'r cyfieithu'n gweithio? Iawn. Just ynghylch y gyllideb, oes modd o gwbl gael eglurhad pellach neu syniad pellach o ran buddsoddi mewn ysgolion bychan, hynna wrth gwrs yw groesawu, pa ysgolion dyn ni'n edrych ar, pa ddiffiniad ydych chi fel awdurdod yn ei ddefnyddio ar gyfer ysgolion bychan, mae yna ddiffiniad penodol gan y Llywodraeth, a beth yw'r diffiniad yna ydych chi'n ddefnyddio. Hefyd y pwysau demograffaidd yma, lle mae yna 788,000 wedi ychwanegu ar gyfer hyn, fedrwch chi ymhelaethu chydig ar y pwysau demograffaidd yna, be mae hynny'n olygu. Diolch.
Who wants to come back with that one? Steve?
Yeah, shall I answer first, and then I'll pass over to Craig on the small schools element. For the demography adjustment, we do it from the September PLASC data, so that's the official data that schools have to return, And it's just on a year-on-year basis. It's a detailed calculation that Craig does for every school. You know, some schools will go down, some schools will go up. Obviously the pressure that's put in is the net figure, but it is a detailed calculation. It's not an estimate. We put in an estimate each year at the beginning of the process, and then, as I say, in the September, when the September PLASC information is available, Craig does a detailed calculation and then passes it to myself to put into the medium-term financial plan. Craig, do you want to go through just on the small schools definitions and things? Because Craig runs the formula in conjunction with the budget forum, schools budget forum, so which is a very detailed document with loads of spreadsheets. So I'll pass over to Craig on the detail on that, if that's okay.
Well, the increase to small schools budget, or the actual definition of a small school?
I think both, actually, Craig, was the question.
Okay. Well, the definition of a small school is quite tricky because speaking to different people, even between ourselves, you know, finance, education, other local authorities, Welsh Government, GWER, they all have different, you know, descriptions of what a small school is, ranging from, you know, 120 down to schools more than 70, less than 50. Previously, in our funding formula, it fell below 50, which we didn't have that many schools. You lost out on certain funding. I won't go into the details of it, it's quite complicated, but basically you got less per pupil and a lump sum. You lost a lump sum. So what we looked at doing, because there are several small schools going into deficit, not the only reason, but we have other small schools which have fallen below 30. We were trying to look at supporting those schools. As Steve said, it's changed what we can work with small schools now. So we looked at reinstalling lump sums for them so they didn't lose them if they fell below 50, and also increasing for those pupils that fell below 50. It was a set amount you received, which didn't match what they received, other schools received with more than 50 pupils. So what we've attempted to do, that 161,000 that's going in, is basically gone into the pot to hopefully support these schools with less than 50 pupils. I haven't got the file open off the top of my head. I think there's about 7 or 8 of them. But the definition of a small school is more tricky. In the funding formula, it's less than 50. But if you spoke to the Welsh Government, they'd probably tell you something different.
But you're working on 50 or less?
Yes, this specific increase in funding is targeted at those schools under 50. Yes.
Diolch.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mabon. Thank you. Thanks, Craig.
No problem.
Alan, did you have your hand up? Alan, yeah.
I did have my hand up, but it was to say I couldn't hear at the time from Craig, but it came back on. But while Craig was on, something did come into my head, and it's just, is there a policy now within the county council in Denbighshire of actually keeping small schools under 50 open? We went through a phase some years ago, didn't we, of closing quite a few schools and all that and merging, and I can understand that. But it seems to me, reading the documents here, that we seem to value and want to value the schools under 50 for a variety of reasons. I know that. So I just wondered what our view is as a council. Does that make sense?
It does. Steve, do you want to field that, or do you want me to?
Well, should I?
Yeah.
I
or
might
Julian.
possibly make a comment on that one.
Thanks,
I mean, there might well be technical comments that Craig or Steve want to make, but essentially, you're quite right. You know, in the last council period, we were following Welsh Government guidance, which at that stage was driving us very much down the surplus places. If schools has X number of surplus places and it's not financially viable, we should be closing them. Welsh Government have now changed that position. So clearly we are not intending and have no intention to be looking at closing smaller schools unless we are directed by external forces to do that at this moment in time. Clearly, if direction changes again from Welsh Government, then we would have to obviously comply with whatever it is that they were doing. It was primarily down to that as the original driver behind the previous policy. But as I say, policy has changed as it tends to do. So we will have to follow that.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Okay, Alan. If I can bring in Martin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mabon asked my first question because I've got an vested interest as well with small schools, and so that's good for the clarification there. I noticed, because we talk about grants from Welsh Government, when I was a school governor, it was a nightmare because we were getting grants from Welsh Government every year, and it depended on the flavour of the month for the minister, and that was very difficult to build that into your budgets and then staff accordingly for that. Are there many grants currently coming out of Welsh Government, and if so, what are they for? Audit of voluntary and private funds. I'm assuming we're talking about the school funds in these cases, or PTA funds and things like that. Are we still offering a service occasionally for them to come to audit and have those books audited? That's just one other question. I noticed in the document too that they talked about, schools applying for lottery funds. Now that one picked my ears up a little, because I thought actually that schools couldn't do that unless it was for something that was not really educationally orientated. Is that so? Can they apply for lottery funds, and if so, is there some guidance for schools on what they could use that funding for? Oh, here we go again. Sorry about this, guys. I don't know whether my secretary will pick that up, but and some of these secondary school budgets are looking pretty bad. I'm assuming that some of these, for example, I look at Prestatin's figures. Has there been a drastic drop in numbers there? Because I know when we opened, renewed the RHEOL's high school, there was a movement of pupils at that time back to RHEOL. Is that a factor in this? Thank you.
Who's taking that one? Yeah.
Julian, do you want me to start?
Yeah, please do. Yes, I think that's probably more technical answers.
I'll answer what I can answer and then pass on to Craig, hopefully to finish off. Yeah, I think you're looking at the second document, which is the full scheme for financing schools, rather than obviously the detail of this report is on the SIFD process, the challenge process. Sorry, can everyone hear me? I'm getting feedback. Yeah, okay. Thanks. So yeah, I mean that's fine, but yeah, so that scheme for financing schools has been approved and is reviewed every couple of years. I know it's something that myself and Craig, it is on the agenda to keep that up to date. I think the last time was about 2 years ago from memory. And so we'll review that. The grants, yes, what schools are still in receipt of a large number of grants. And they are sometimes in year, as you know, as you can see, we had late announcement of pay grants this year to cover the increase in the teachers' pay. It wasn't a huge amount, but they're late announcements. They tend to not be as late as the council ones, which tends to be capital in nature, and that's the real concern for us as a council, that we tend to get late announcements about capital grants. For schools, the two main ones that were probably of concern are the PDG, or pupil deprivation grant, or whatever it's called now, it's pupil whatever grant, it changes its name, and that's the grant that's allocated on a per free school meal allocation. Now free school meals allocations of numbers have gone up this year, have gone up across the board, mainly because of the direct payments. So obviously people who were probably reticent, maybe were a bit not keen on putting their hands up and actually claiming what they're entitled to on free school meals. As soon as obviously you're offering actual funding for holiday entitlement, which we never did before. You know, it's actually probably encouraged more people, and obviously then there's just an increase in need because of COVID as well. Now, I'm not sure, I don't know whether we're still waiting on those announcements for next year on a number of grants. The other key one, which I'll bring in Craig on, is obviously the sixth form grants. The post-16 grants still funds most of the sixth form elements of secondary schools. I'm not sure whether we've had final indication of that. Craig, are you aware? We had final indication?
No, I spoke to Chris Speed, who's our senior grants officer, the other day, and he's basically said the indications from Welsh Government is that the main school grants, obviously there are several others, but the main ones that support budgets being EIG, Education Improvement, PDG, Pupil Deprivation, and Post-16, there's no indication that there's going to be cuts to those next year, but that is all we have, really. I attend meetings with Welsh Government and ADU in Mid Wales, and there was no update last time on the post-16 grant. So no, other than hopefully it won't be cut. I have no more information as yet now.
And I think that's what I've heard. The only concern I have is on the PDG, because that's given out on a per. You know that's not a quantum that's then put into a formula. But you have a certain amount of money for every pupil you have in receipt of free school meals. So obviously Welsh Government are going to have to find quite a lot extra money for schools to still have the per pupil element to be the same. And I haven't heard that that's been confirmed yet. So that would be, I suppose, the one area of concern on the grants. But yes, we do still wait for grants announcements. And then they're never announced at the same time as revenue support grants, or very rarely. You tend to get the revenue support grant announced and then grants are tidied up in the weeks and months to follow, which is the bit we're in now. Obviously delayed as the revenue support grant draft settlement was delayed as well, so everything has a knock-on effect. The voluntary fund, the school fund, as I call it, I mean, that's probably more Lisa Lovegrove to respond. She's on the call, I think, on the meeting. But as far as I'm aware, yes, that has been part of a separate audit, and that's been reported to corporate governance in the recent past. We say recent past, but the year of COVID seems to, it was certainly more than a year ago anyway, but it has come to corporate governance recently, inverted commas, around the progress on that. And I think internal audit have done a lot of work on improving the timeliness of those audits. So I don't know whether Lisa would want to come into that. Lottery funding, I'm not aware of any restrictions. Again, I don't know whether Craig knows any more. So if he does, then you can come in at the end. And the secondary school funding issue in Prestatyn is probably one for Craig as well. Craig, can you answer those two last ones?
I can't help with lottery funding, if I'm honest, but it's certainly one I can look into for you if you want me to. I'll put that down as something to look at. I don't know. It's more of a school level one, you see. So we have finance managers in all the clusters. If one of those was here, they would know. But unfortunately, from my level, I don't get involved with that. But I'll look into that for you.
Thank you.
The Prestatyn one, yeah, I can answer that. It's partly anyway. Yes, Prestatyn High School, if you look at their pupil numbers, are a lot lower now than they were, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. I think they were up to probably 1,600 pupils at that stage. Top of my head, I haven't got the file open now, but I think they're probably down to about 1,200. So, you know, there has been a significant drop. Also, they had a double whammy a couple of years ago, as in their pupil numbers fell. They were just in the process of appointing a new head teacher. And also at the same time, the post-16 grant was cut. Plus, they lost about 100 pupils from the sixth form, simply rationalising it. There was a lot of pupils there who weren't really studying. You know, I won't go into the detail of all that, but they wanted the sixth form to be there, for, you know, to provide for the students and do A levels and AS levels, etc. So they made criteria to get into the sixth form more difficult, and they did lose pupils because of that. That, coupled with the cut in the grants plus their fall in roles and a delay whilst a new person was in place, has basically caused, you know, the huge £1 million deficit. The good news with them is they're not nowhere near full, and their pupil numbers are going up again. So, you know, there is scope there to, you know, get the money back at some point. They have a encouraging 3-year plan, and as long as those pupil numbers come to fruition, I see them, you know, being in the same position as Bryn Hubbard were a couple of years ago, really, and they're now in a very, you know, favourable position. So yeah, from that point of view, in terms of where the real thing, I don't know, if I'm honest. I think if education are probably best answering that question with, in terms of where admissions came from to go to Real High, if they came from Statin, I don't know off the top of my head, if I'm honest. Again, I can ask Geraint if you want me to take that any further.
Okay, I have another two speakers, well, three speakers actually. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. It was only to say that there was concern about this by this committee some while ago about the process. I'm just making the comment that I think it's good to have the assurance that a policy such as this is working satisfactorily. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We've got Tony.
Yeah, hi, are we good here? Yeah, I think the numbers were 62 when Real High opened as a new school. I think 62 who were travelling in left and went, and then of course Christ the Word, there was a few more. So it was sort of up towards the 100 students, which of course makes some sort of effect on income. With the sixth form, the numbers aren't far off 1,500 at the moment, but that includes the sixth form. I think that, you know, Craig has explained that really well. And this year it's on target to break even. So no further losses this year. And then a very strong 3-year plan that could, unless there's any surprises, will potentially wipe out that entire close to £1 million deficit. You know, the only other thing I would say is, ever since the new head teacher came in, from day one, all he had to do was face efficiency savings from day one. Now, I know when I first became a governor nearly 10 years ago, we always had about 4% of our budget left over. We were never under pressure, whereas the new head teacher, all he's been is under pressure. So he's done a tremendous job. And also I want to pay tribute to Chris Speed from DCC, who's been assisting in a role that we've had vacant, the business and finance manager. Chris has been outstanding. So I know I want to thank him. You know, that was a key moment when we had our business and finance manager go on long-term sick, and then to suddenly announce that the person was leaving. It was such a key role. But you know what? This school, the ship has been steadied. It's looking good this year, and it's got a fantastic 3-year forward working program. So I just want to pay tribute to, you know, all these difficulties that they've had to face. They have overcome, and so congratulations to Prestatyn. Thank you.
Yeah, can I come in there?
Yes, go on, Steve.
Yeah, well, can I just thank Tony for that explanation and kind words. I'll pass on. Obviously, Chris works for me, and we've obviously put in place, you know, the help that the head teacher has requested, and hopefully that's worked. And I'll pass on your thanks. Thank you very much for that. Just the other thing to mention on a wider aspect of the scheme, I mean, that's the whole point, is that a school can be in deficit, but we can be assured that they have plans in place, and Prestatyn is one of those. You know, that they can, the schools we're worried about is if the deficit is increasing, and we can't see a way forward for them over that 3-year plan. If a school has a deficit and it's under control or improving over that 3 years, you know, we can work with the school, and we can make a difference. Hopefully that the extra funding that we found this year, which is over and above what they've received in recent years, also will help those schools, as Craig mentioned at the very beginning. But so thank you for that, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Thanks, Steve. Is that it from members before I open it up to members outside this committee? Yeah. Okay. Merrick, you wanted to come in?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd. A diolch am yr adroddiad, cynhwysfawr iawn ac beth sydd wedi mynd ymlaen hyd yn hyn. Os gael droi i tudalen 86, gris 8, da chi wedi rhoi pum bach o sgwennu coch o dan rhif 2. The school will also be requested to discuss the deficit at the Council's Corporate Governance Committee. Faint o golled sydd gan yr ysgol pan fyddwch chi wedi dod â hi o flaen y pwyllgor? Dwi'n gwybod wrach fydd o wahanol os ydy'n ysgol fechan neu'n ysgol uwchradd. Ond oeddwn ni ar y pwyllgor pen oeddwn ni'n cael trafferthion efo ysgol yn Rhyl. Ac yn y diwedd arnyn ni golli'r arian. Ddaru'r arian gael ei anghofio oherwydd bod chi wedi tynnu'r ysgol i lawr ac wedi codi ysgol newydd. Felly dwi'n gobeithio wneith hynny ddim digwydd eto. Dwi'n mynd dweud bod chi'n mynd i godi chwaneg ysgolion newydd, cofiwch. Ond dwi'n meddwl bod eisiau bod yn rhoi mwy o waith i mewn i gael yr costau lawr i drio cael y coch i'r dŷ. Pethau erys gynnau, os gai, y problem da ni'n gael mewn ysgol fach, a wrach ysgol fawr hefyd, ydy, os ydy rhif y plant yn mynd i fyny, dedwch 3 mis i mewn i'r flwyddyn ariannol, gawn ni ddim dimau mwy i redeg yr ysgol. Wel, mae hynny'n broblem os ydych chi newydd gael gwared o dedwch athro neu 2 mwyn lleihau y golled. Felly, sut mae ysgol i fod i redeg os ydy hynny'n digwydd? A mae yn digwydd, da ni wedi cael rhagor o blant yn ganol y flwyddyn, dechrau flwyddyn ar ôl i'r rhif fynd i mewn, ond gawn ni ddim dimau mwy. Os newch chi edrych ar tudalen 124, da chi wedi dangos rhai o'r ysgolion sydd yn y coch, ar y 2 tudalen dweud y gwir, 123. Ac mae'n dangos y fanau'n glir yn dydy y colledion da ni wedi gael. Ac beth sy'n syni fi, os ydw i wedi darllen hwn yn gywir, mae ysgol newydd Crist y byd yn yr Rhyl mewn colled yn barod o £200,000. Os dwi'n iawn, 4,112 o bunnoedd. Faswn i wedi meddwl bod chi'n cychwyn ysgol newydd hefo digon o bres. Sut bod ne golled bron iawn cyn gyntaf am wedi agor. Wrach allwch chi'n helpu fi yn fanno. Diolch o fawr.
Thank you, Merrick. Yeah, if Steve could probably let Merrick know the situation at Christ the White Word School, because I'd be interested as being the chair.
Yeah, do you want me to just go through the question?
Yeah, please, Steve.
So I'm getting feedback on my line. I can hear myself talking to myself. Yeah, so there isn't a limit. There isn't a fixed amount where myself and Geraint would come to the decision that a school would need to come to Corporate Governance Committee. As I was just saying to Tony, that it's more around the whether we can see improvement and the school is working in partnership with us to improve the position. If that's the case and we can see that over a 3-year period, we can see that they're going to make progress, then we'll continue to work with the schools. If we think that there's things that schools can do and they're not listening to us, for example, then we might decide to bring them to corporate governance. So it isn't a black and white decision on whether it comes to corporate governance. As far as the in-year changes are concerned, obviously the school budget formula is decided by the school budget forum. Now we facilitate those discussions, and Craig does huge amount of work on modelling various changes that the school budget forum request, but ultimately it's the school budget forum who decides on that, and they could decide that they want in-year reallocations of funding. the decision so far has been that that causes more churn and more disruption, and actually a set amount for the particular year is better. Schools, the whole point of the 3-year planning and the fact that they can carry forward deficits and carry forward obviously positive balances allows schools to balance the position over a 3-year period instead of for council services. Obviously they just get the budget for the year and that's it, they overspend in the year. So that helps them facilitate, but ultimately it's up to the school budget for them to have that discussion, and we would work with them to work out the pros and cons of any proposal that they came up with. Craig, do you want to just talk about real high?
Yeah, just to echo what Steve's just said on that as well. Going back probably 10 years ago or 9 years, something like that, when there was a complete review of the school funding formula, and one of the things that changed that schools at the time didn't like was, obviously it swings and roundabouts, is the in-year adjustment. Now the problem with that is as Merrick said, is obviously if a school's growing, then potentially they would get an adjustment to the positive. But the problem with the in-year adjustment is it doesn't allow you to plan, because you don't necessarily know at the start of April how many pupil numbers you're going to have in September. And for example, those 18 schools, I would, in the majority of cases, as they're in deficit, the majority of them would be losing pupils. They would then have a negative deficit applied to the same year budget that they wouldn't have known about at the start of the year. So that's the reasoning behind it. You know, there's all sorts of discussions about which version is better across Wales. There's various different versions. Others have adjustments. We no longer have one. So as Steve said, the 3-year plan allowed them to plan over time rather than have an adjustment during the year, which they wouldn't have known about when they were setting their budget. To go on to Christ the Word, yeah, it's a difficult one. It's not ideal, but basically, off the top of my head, I think between YSGOLION and Blessed, they built up, there was a deficit of about £1 million, might have been 900,000 approximately. That, as Eric said, as the new school was opened, was they removed that deficit and they started from scratch. The problem is with starting from scratch, the trouble in the other two schools was that the pupil numbers were extremely low, especially in the secondary school. I think there was one class in the secondary school with less than 30 pupils, which is, you know, unheard of. So they didn't just, you know, just because they built a new school, they didn't magic 500 pupils from somewhere to put in it. So the trouble is that to start with, the school, although carrying a zero balance, was going into a deficit immediately because they haven't got enough pupils for the school, in a nutshell. But there is, from my point of view, that's one of the least worries of Christ the Word, because their pupil numbers are rising dramatically. You know, they will not be in a deficit position for very long. You know, obviously the effect of a new head, new build, whatever else the effect is that they will hopefully, if they stick to their plan, come out of a deficit very quickly. But that's the reasoning behind it, is basically they carried no deficit, but they still didn't have enough pupils to fill the school, i.e. not giving them enough funding. I don't know if
Thank you, Craig, for that.
Okay, no problem.
I knew that, obviously, as chair, but I wanted a bit of backup there. Are you all right, Merrick, with that?
Diolch yn fawr, ateb da iawn. Diolch I chi, Mr Cadeirydd.
No problem, thank you.
Thank you very much. Going on to the recommendation there was, just let me get my glasses on. For the contents of the report to be discussed. And I think, members, we've had a good discussion there on that. Okay, thank you. Just before moving on to agenda number 8, do you want a quick 10-minute break? Because I know this is a real long agenda. If we come back for 12 o'clock. Thank you very much. On a minute past 12. If we carry on then with agenda item number 8, which is pages 125 to 158, to consider a report by the Head of Finance and Property, Treasury Management Strategy Statement 21-22, and Prudential Indicators 21-22 to 23-24, and Treasury Management Update Report 2020-21. Is that you, Steve, or Julian?
Yes, Chair. I will kick off before handing over to Steve for the technical bits. As I'm sure you're aware, as you said, there were two elements to the report that's before you this morning. There's the Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 21-22. Prior to this will, assuming you're happy with it as a committee, this will be going to full council in February for its annual approval. And then the second part is the update on where we are in year, essentially. I'm not going to go through in vast details through the first part, the strategy statement. I'm sure that you've all been through this several times now and are aware of the format of what's actually contained within the document, and there's not been apart from obviously updating figures, there's not actually anything substantially changed in terms of the form of data that is being presented to you. You'll see if you go to Appendix 1, which contains the statement, the graphs towards the beginning of that show the general trends that borrowing, as we know, generally is increasing at a time when our investment income is reducing. That's not a situation that's that's just happened. That's one we've been reporting for a number of years now. Then the report goes through the usual areas of who we can and can't use as counterparties to invest with, where and to whom we report. Obviously, this committee has regular updates with regards to that. The training that's been undertaken. There's a substantial area because we can. This is one area where you definitely can hold the entire conversation using acronyms. I think probably. So there's a significant definitions section to the annexes here. Annex A to this report lists the performance indicator data. You may well remember that I think it was 2 years ago now that the capital elements of the performance indicators were actually stripped out of this report and put into another report which goes to full council. So those aren't covered within this element. Those are the usual ones I refer to in terms of our ratio of borrowing in relation to in relation to our budget and things like that. So that's no longer contained within this strategy document. And then it deals with a number of areas like credit risk and a number of the other areas that you'll see within the document. I'm not going to go through too much detail on Appendix 2, which is the update, because I'll ask Steve to take you through that in a bit more detail. But just to highlight one point, that when we started the COVID period around about March time, we did have some genuine and significant fears about our cash flow situation, seeing as we're paying out a lot of grants up front and all of the rest of that. But that cash flow position has improved markedly. We've worked very well with Welsh Government in terms of getting advances and things like that. But that was probably the chief area that I wanted to highlight. But I'm sure Steve will take us through in more detail the balance of the report. So I'll hand over to him at this point.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Again, I think you've probably covered most things, but I'll just highlight a few extra bits. So the first item or appendix is called appendix because there's basically two elements in one. So the strategy, which you need to review, a lot of this is the same information updated each year. It's a strategy and a set of prudential indicators that need to be reviewed every year to ensure they're fit for purpose, but there is an element of repetition, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. The two charts that Julian referenced do sort of tell the story, really. You know, we are a council that is borrowing. You'll see on the second chart, the investment balances chart, that at the beginning of this year there was a little peak that made it look like we had some money. That was largely because of the resolution of the issue that Julian's just referenced. So at the beginning of this year, we were asked to pay out 30-odd million pounds in business grants and about 13 million pounds in rate relief, which also has an impact on our cash flow. Although we're not paying out, it impacts our cash flow to give that rate relief. At the beginning of this financial year, so Welsh Government, we worked with Welsh Government and the WLGA to resolve that, and they did come up with a really good package that allowed us to plan our finances and the treasury management and cash flow properly. So they paid the details are in the report, but they paid RSG early. So they didn't obviously increase the amount of RSG we paid, but they front loaded it for the beginning of the year. So what it meant was that we had some cash to manage at the beginning of this financial year. So we did have to invest short term that money to make sure mainly it was safe. You know, the three responsibilities for treasury management are to ensure security of our resources, of our cash, and that's the safeness of it, and those are all the prudential indicators around who we are allowed to borrow, who we are allowed to put our money with and borrow from. You know, we all remember the Icelandic bank, whatever it's called, Land Banksy or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Northern Rock and all those things. You know, but it really is. You know, it's a bit like the pandemic. You know, if you don't, it seems a very long way and a very minor risk until it actually happens, and then it becomes a major one. And that's the same with the security of our finances. So that's the key one, is the security, and the two other ones are liquidity and yield. Liquidity and yield are two elements that have sort of aren't uppermost in our mind at the moment, mainly because we don't have that much money to invest. Well, we don't have any money to invest in the long term, and our only our reason for investing in the short term is to put it somewhere safe so that we know that it's there when we need it, and that's where the liquidity comes in, so that we know that we can draw it down when we require later on in the financial year. So those are the three things. But as I say, and yield at the moment is
non-existent.
Non-existent anyway. So as you'll know, I report in the monthly finance report that goes to Cabinet just the total borrowing and the total investments. And during the year, we have had some investments, these short-term investments that I've just been talking about, and I've actually had to increase the number of decimal places I've had to report on, because otherwise we'd just be getting 0% for, you know, there was 0.09% interest rates on short-term, investments that we were putting in. They're not really investments, they're, as I say, they're lodgements for safety rather than investments, those elements. But so yeah, that sort of summarizes where we're in section 4 is quite a good just summary and illustration of our borrowing strategy, really. So the three elements are that we lock in borrowing at a cheap level as it is now, as and when we and our treasury management consultants deem appropriate. So at the beginning of the year, we locked in 15 million on a 10-year period, and you can see the interest rate 0.94%. So that's how generous those interest rates are at the moment. So that's just an illustration of what we're doing at the moment. We work closely with Arlene Close to judge that right and to make sure that we capitalize on the lowest interest rates. But obviously we wouldn't get any, there's no point us borrowing to invest because we're not getting any money back. So we need to time it right and only borrow when we actually need to borrow, because it would still cost us to borrow to invest, because the rate we get from investments is lower than it would cost us to borrow. So we need to be careful around that, and that's all about timing to make sure that we get it right. And secondly, to manage that short-term cash flow, which was what those graphs were showing. So we do invest, but only in the very short term, and that's for security purposes. And we work with Welsh Government on delivering some of their schemes this year to make sure that it doesn't impact on our cash flow. So that's the principle. The other important bit to point out, 6.4 and 6.5, which is the MRP statement. You know, we have to review that annually, and it's up to yourselves and council to approve. There's no change, so just pointing that out. Really, we made the change a couple of years ago, and that actually benefited us financially. And you know, I can't see a change coming in the near future unless accounting regulations change. So that there's no change there, just for you to be aware. And the only other point I wanted to stress, so that's it for the Appendix 1. The Appendix 2, there was just one thing I just wanted to highlight, is is Section 4 of Appendix 2, which I will try and get the page number now. Sorry, I'm working on two different. So it's on page
147.
It's is it 147?
Annex.
Yeah, 148 on the English version maybe. So it's the PWB section 4 of that, PWLB borrowing rate, and this is just to highlight a change in the regulations around PWB. And we have been highlighting this as a risk going forward because it was out for consultation. But this is around, and there was something in the press this week about it actually. That this is for us sort of a hammer to crack a nut really, but for English authorities it's a lot more concerning. As the funding for English authorities has come down over the last 10 years significantly, and their capacity to increase council tax has been small. They have increasingly relied on, and I'll put this in inverted commas, sort of risky or more risky of investments.
Speculative investments.
Speculative is probably a better way to put it. Yeah. So there's an example would be an out of town supermarket. There's no reason for doing it as part of our day-to-day activity. It's not helping deliver any of our priorities. The only reason for entering into that activity is for a financial return, and that's really the definition of what they're trying to get at, is using taxpayers' cash, in other words, to invest in activity which is you're only doing it for financial return. Now, there's a very good reason for doing that for councils if they're financial, if they do it properly, and it has helped a lot of English councils to do that. But anyway, so they've changed the rules around PWLB, and they're saying that you can't borrow. You can still enter into those transactions or those sorts of projects, but you won't be able to borrow from the PWLB to do so. And not only will you not be able to borrow from the PWLB to do so, you won't be able to borrow from the PWLB for the period of that investment for any other activity either. So it really is sort of trying to influence authorities to move away. Now, for us, we haven't done any, and we don't plan to do any of this activity. Where it might impact us is to just make sure we cover ourselves on some activity that may be considered for investment. So, for example, SC2, on the face of it, we're building a tourist attraction on the Real Prom that could be considered a commercial activity. Now, actually, the reason for doing that wasn't for commercial gain. We actually had to put money in to subsidize the borrowing costs for that. The reason for doing it was for the regeneration of the area, and that is allowed, but it's just we will probably have to make sure that projects like that we actually get approval prior at an early stage, and we get the sort of green light from our treasury management consultants and the PWLB to make sure that they're happy that that is a regeneration project. You know, we're not doing it for commercial gain, we're doing it for regeneration purposes. So it's just probably an added complication for us rather than impacting on anything we'd want to do. But it's just so you're aware of that. The only other thing, sorry, I was going to point out was in the other report was just the the comedy of the graphs around the interest rate estimates going forward, where it looks like it's like a straight line. It's like we're on the end of some casualty episode. It's just, you know, it's that there's no prospect of any change to the interest rates in the foreseeable future as far as either we can see or our treasury management can see. So it does make the day-to-day treasury management, managing our cash flow slightly easier if it, in a practical terms, even if it means that the returns on investment, etc., are laughably low. So yeah, so that's just a summary. Oh, the only other thing I was going to mention was that we had a training session. The last training session was in November 2019, which might seem 2 years ago on the face of it, but it's actually just over 12 months ago because it was in November. So it's probably not a priority at the moment, but possibly, certainly after the next election, we'll look to arrange something else. But if there's a requirement, we'll work with Arlene Close to bring something probably in the summer if you wanted anything, or maybe in September if you wanted anything further around treasury management training. But I'll leave that for yourselves to discuss, and we can arrange as required. Okay, I think that's it from me.
Thank you, Steve. Looking at members, Martin, you had your hand up.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I think because I'd homed in on some of the issues that you've actually covered, certainly in the graphs showing the figures going up to about 35 million and then coming down to about 10 million in relation to investments. I'd assumed that it might have been some of that 15 million you borrowed as well, that you've put it on one side. To see if you can get the interest on that. You're not the only ones, by the way, not getting the interest on our savings. So there we go. Just a couple of quick questions. Let's have a look, and I've got it here. Cash flow, the cash flow situation. You say things are now looking a bit better, but obviously at the moment we have no cash coming in from many of the usual sources, car parks, leisure centres and things like that. No cash flow coming in. Are you still happy that we're going to see ourselves through this difficult period? And borrowing, just on the borrowing point, it's one of my favourite topics, as you'll know. Just where are we with the borrowing at the moment in relation to the ratio that we normally work to? In that, are we getting to the top of our borrowing levels that are safe for the council?
Julian, do you want to say something first, and I'll come in?
Yeah, in terms of the ratios, as I said, it's actually not part of this report because it's now hived off and put into a separate report, which comes separately. But you're right. Obviously, it is always a fine line in terms of our borrowing levels in ratio to it. I mean, currently, I don't think there's a particular issue with regards to the levels that we're at the moment. What we, I suppose, have to bear in mind is with capital projects going forward, on some of the more recent ones, like the flood scheme we approved in Will not so long ago. Yes, Welsh Government are supporting us with that, but we're having to do all the borrowing up front and then be refunded over a period of time. And if that's carried on in other projects going forward, that's something that we need to bear in mind in terms of our overall exposure. I suppose it is guaranteed income. It's just delayed guaranteed income, which I suppose is the issue with regards to that. But I suppose to answer the question, and it's always difficult because we all probably have a slightly different level of what we deem to be, risk, and on what level we're prepared to accept. But certainly, I mean, Steve can answer this from his professional perspective. But in terms of where we are currently and where we're projecting to be in the medium term, I don't see that we're at significant risk in terms of our ratio of borrowing. Steve, I don't know whether.
Yeah, I'll come in there. Yeah, I mean, Julian's right. It's okay at the moment. The key, there's two key ones. There's the level we set each year, but we do set it each year, the level of borrowing. And there's a couple of indicators that are in there, and they're around making sure that I don't go crazy and borrow money that isn't agreed by the council. So you set parameters that to sort of delegate to us to professionally then manage, and that you're happy for us to borrow up to that amount as a council. And that's the sort of point of that, is that I can't do anything in between those. If I did, I'd have to come back, and myself and Julian would come back to Cabinet and Council to explain why, if there was something. And that was one of the risks around really the beginning of the year with what Welsh Government were asking us to do. We not only would we have had to have paid for the borrowing costs, which would have been unfair, but it would also have impacted our total borrowing if we'd have funded some of those schemes ourselves and got the cash back at a later date from Welsh Government. There was too significant. But the main or one of the other PI is around the percentage of our net revenue budget that we spend on servicing our borrowing. And strangely, each time we obviously get a better than expected settlement, that percentage goes down, because with 12 million as a percentage of 208 million is lower than it is of 216 million, which is our net budget that we've just approved for next year. So it is a movable feast, and we do need to keep our eye on it. And I think as we go forward for the planning for the next corporate plan, we need to make sure that we're prudent about, and it's a horrible word to use, but we're prudent about what we actually can achieve from unsupported borrowing. I think is the key element, and we'll be doing some work on that over the next 6 months to make sure everyone agree. It's clear what the position we're taking on it and how much we want to borrow for particular schemes. I think some work is needed to be done on that. On the wider position, obviously, from a cash perspective, actually, we're not too bad, because obviously they came up, what Welsh Government did was pay us up front for a number of schemes. So the 30 million, they actually gave us 16 million up front, which helped, and then gave us the rest of the money a couple of months later. They also paid us the revenue support grant up front, not all of it, but they front loaded it to the beginning of the year. The other thing is you're talking about the loss income. Don't forget that we are getting millions and millions of pounds from Welsh Government through the quarterly loss of income claim. So we're not getting it on a daily, monthly basis, but we are being reimbursed for our loss of income. And the latest figures, about £8 million of money have come in from the lost income grant. So we are getting that money back. I mean, there are some elements that they've refused to fund, but they are minor compared to the grand scheme of things. So not only is our cash flow supported by that, but our overall budget position is obviously supported by that funding. We would be lost without the help that we've had from Welsh Government in support for our loss of income and for that expenditure. But yeah, the loss of income especially.
Yeah, just to come back on that, yeah, I was aware obviously of the Welsh Government scheme in relation to the sea defences. It's a nice way of offloading the borrowing onto local government, so it doesn't appear on your books, but you make the repayments annually to that local authority to clear the debt. The danger is, as you rightly say, if they keep doing that with other projects, then it's our borrowing levels that will be affected. Although the money's coming in to cover the payments, it's the borrowing levels that are worrying, and it's artificially inflating our borrowing levels, you know, to possibly get the Welsh Government out of a hole. The only other thing too I picked up in your report, that we have been able to rejig some of our borrowing to take advantage of the better interest rates at the moment. I'm assuming that doesn't apply to some of the long-term large borrowing that we had inherited from Clwyd and the what was the council called down the coast there, you know, that we inherited, which were at extortionate interest rates, and we're still paying for those. So I'm assuming we haven't been able to rejig that borrowing, because I think you've said in the past that if we tried that, there would be penalties. Is that right? Still?
Yeah, that's right. We can only it's only worthwhile doing it when they end, basically when the agreement ends, and then we can look to reprofile and reborrow. But before that, the penalty clauses tend to outweigh any benefit from a low interest rate that we'd get going forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. I've got no hands up. I want to move on because it is getting on. If I move to the recommendations on this, committee reviews the TMSS for 2021-22 and the prudential indicators for 2021-22, 22, 23, 23 and 24. The members note the TM update report and that the committee confirms that it is read, understood and taken account of the wellbeing impact assessment as part of its consideration. Are you happy, members? Please show. Thank you. Quickly moving on to agenda item number 9 is the annual government statement improvement update. To receive an update on the progress in the implementation and improvement plan contained within the annual governance statement 2019-20, pages 159 and 166. Is this you, Lisa?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the reason for this report is to give you an update on the improvement actions that were agreed in the annual governance statement that came to the committee in July, and also as part of the statement of accounts that were approved in September. It's good practice to obviously have oversight of the improvement plan and given the committee's role to have assurance that those improvements are underway and on target to be implemented by the agreed time. So I don't plan to take you through each of the actions, but Appendix 1 to the report list as a table there with all 8 actions, and all of them are making progress. There's a comment in the final column. Some of the dates have been revised, they have been extended, but still within this financial year, most of them. So there will be a further update as part of the annual governance statement for this financial year when that comes to committee in April.
Thank you, Lisa. Members happy with that? Any questions? No? Okay. Moving on then to the recommendation is for the committee to review and comment on the progress. And as Lisa said, we will get in a follow-up later on. Yeah, okay, thanks, Lisa. Moving on then to agenda item number 10, which is contract management audit revised action plan, pages 167 to 178. To receive the update action plan to the contract management internal audit report. Is that you again, Lisa?
Yeah, it's myself, and Gary might want to input a little bit as well. We produced a low assurance report that came to committee in July 2020, and several of the actions were down to the corporate support services review for them to implement. and that particular work stream has been on hold in light of COVID. So committee agreed that we should relook at the action plan to ensure that it was realistic. And so we have done that, and this action plan in Appendix 1 provides an update. And the main changes, the actions themselves haven't changed too much. A few have been updated just in terms of wording to reflect some changes that have happened in the time since the original action plan was agreed. But mainly it's to give a responsibility to named officers rather than the Corporate Support Services Review. Some of the dates have been revised as well, so that there's a realistic time frame for implementation. And that's it. So it's to have assurance really that the action plan is in place and more realistic, and committee to decide whether it wants a further update in terms of a follow-up at a later stage.
Thank you, Lisa. Did you want to come in, Gary, on that?
It was just sorry, can you hear me? I know that there was a problem before. Just to thank Lisa actually for the work that Lisa's done in helping sort out the action plan. We had a meeting recently, myself, Steve, Lee Evans from procurement, Paul Barnes, who was on the CSSR and is one of the sort of exemplars of contract management within the authority, to try and work up an action plan which came out of the CSSR process and was, as Lisa said, assigned to individuals with new realistic time scales based on sort of the delay inevitably that happened over the last few months. So one, the 20th February on the agenda for SLT for the middle of February. That was confirmed today. It's on the 18th of February. Some of the training that's referred to in there had already begun pre-lockdown, and the e-learning elements have continued. And as you can see, that there's going to be some development of contract management principles training and other standard documents and templates that will assist contract managers to do the right thing at the right time in terms of the contracts that they're responsible for. So it was just a thank you to everybody who's been involved, really, and that we've got now a clear plan to take this forward.
Thank you, Gary. It's obviously been a difficult time with reports like this to make sure that they stay on track. Paul, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just to say that traditionally you only get a good contract performance in terms of quality, cost and time if you have a strong client, a contract manager, and without that, contracts will not be delivered. I think it's really a culture issue, and best practice needs to be shared. But I would ask the question, when you talk about contracts, most people traditionally have thought only of construction. There are so many more contracts, non-construction, and we need to make sure that those are brought into the training scenario, and make sure that then all contracts, whatever nature, are treated the same way. And finally, yes, I would like to see a follow-up to this in the normal way, please. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, Chair, just to come back. Yeah, the intention is that this applies to all contracts, and indeed. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All contracts, and indeed, we've been greatly helped by Paul Barnes, who's got experience of managing service contracts through Civica and other things. And the intention is, you're right, it is a cultural thing. And you'll see in there that what we're looking to do as well is to create a sort of forum for contract managers to be able to get together and discuss best practice as well, so that we can seed what's good through the authority and grow, if you like, the expertise within the authority. So that's the approach.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Paul. I don't see any other hands up, members. So, Martin.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, it was just a couple of quick things. In a past life, I used to manage a number of contracts, some of them quite big contracts, and that, you know, the whole thing about this is meeting with the contractors on a regular basis to assess how the contract is working, and that they're meeting the objectives that you've set them. So, you know, as long as I've looked at the report, there's a lot of the good things in there. We are doing things, but unless we've got a handle on it quite regularly and you're checking, we also don't know at the end of the day whether the contracts are going to be value for money if we're not doing that. And also, you know, who do we not use again at the end of the term of a contract? Because if they've failed, then we shouldn't be going out to those contractors again. And Paul's right, it's not, everybody thinks it's construction, but, you know, I managed one which was all to do with recruitment advertising, and it was a big contract. So unless you're on top of that, you know, and talking to them when things don't work and it falls down to make sure it does work. The only other question, a quick question I have is, do we, because there's a question mark of where those contracts are in some cases, do we scan them? Do we hold them electronically as well at a central point?
Did you want me to pick that up? Yeah, well, one of the issues again is making sure that they're on the, if you like, the Proactis module. Now, clearly there's a resource issue in doing that, and we're still looking at, the drive will be to impress upon all relevant managers that those documents have to be uploaded into the Proactis system. The issue at the moment is whether we have the appropriate resource to be able to upload historical, or whether we sort of concentrate on from now on. And I think we are looking at ways in which we might be able to get pre-existing contracts up there. But the important thing is to make sure that they're there, not just from, if you like, the performance contract management, but also about our ability to horizon scan for future collaborative opportunities with procurement, so that centrally we've got an idea about when things are coming to an end, that we can have a look at whether or not there are opportunities to join with others to collaborate, or whether we can extend certain contracts to meet the end dates of other people, so we can have joint exercises. So there's lots of benefits to that, and it should be happening. And the whole point of this is to make sure that it does happen.
Okay, so Proactis does actually scan the document in, does it? It records the whole.
You're talking to someone who will never become a tech billionaire. Lee will know better the detail, but there's a process of being able to upload the document into the system, so that the system is there and we can see it.
That's grand.
Did you want to come in, Steve? I see you light on.
I was just going to say just what Gary did. What the Proactis has is the ability you can upload scanned documents. So it's not the smoothest of systems for doing it, but it does allow you to attach documents to contracts, and that's what would happen in this instance. So yes, it can.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, Martin. See no other hands, we'll move on. The recommendation that the committee reviews the revised action plan and decides whether it requires any further update reports on progress with the improvement action plan. And I think Paul's mentioned there that he would like to see further updates if we can. You okay with that, members? Show hands. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 11, and that's the Corporate Governance Committee Work Programme, pages 179 to 182. Lisa?
Again, it's not normally me that leads on this item, but I can comment on items that I would like to update on the forward work programme that I can see perhaps not reflected at the moment. There should be the draft annual governance statement to come to the committee in April. There's a couple of follow-up reports as well that seem to have drifted from the forward work programme. I think the direct payments one is there for March, but there should also be a follow-up of the housing tenancy low assurance report. and the payment card industry, the PCI DSS follow-up as well. And then in June, if you could add the internal audit annual report.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, going forward, it does look a little bit easier than this this agenda today. So
I don't want to burst your balloon on that, Chair, but we may have a number of things that need to come arising out of the Local Government Act. So we may from time to time need to seed things into the agenda because we need a constitutional change or something to be approved and recommended here for it to go to council, etc. But we're in the hands of the government at the minute as to when those regulations and other things happen.
yeah, thanks, Gary. Obviously, we'll have to put them in. Paul, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I was only going to reinforce what Gary's just said, that under the forward work programme, you've got a future items heading, and perhaps LGE items ought to go there, at least as a memory jogger. I think there's also Treasury Management in July coming out of item 8, a partnership framework coming out of item 9, and then contract management that we've just spoken about out of item 10.
Yeah, in terms of contract management, I would expect, given the dates in the revised action plan, for that to come either April or June.
Yeah,
because a lot of the dates are end of March on that one.
Yeah. Well, I picked up from the governance statement that there was reference there to a partnership framework.
Yes, that's with Nicola Neal's team, and the expectation was that it would be completed by the end of March.
Okay.
So yeah, I can find out from that team when they would like that to be scheduled for this meeting, but it should be March or April. Yeah, well spotted.
And then Treasury Management was suggested for July. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you,
Chair,
Paul.
Chair, is it okay? Sorry, I probably shouldn't draw attention to this because Lisa's waiting for my comments on her draft. But in the annual governance statement, there is the fraud, the anti-fraud and corruption policy, which Lisa has revised and she sent to me for comment. And as usual, she's waiting for me before she can move that on. But that's got a date of the end of March as well, so that will need to come later in the year for your approval.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Happy with that? Moving on, we're almost there. Agenda item number 12, internal audit update, pages 183 to 234, to consider a report by the head of internal audit, updating members on internal audit progress.
Okay, thank you. So it's the usual report. I'll take you through the summary in against the report details of the covering report, first of all. So since the last Corporate Governance and Audit Committee...
Sorry to cut across. Should we be in part 2, although we're not with the public?
Not at this moment, I don't think. Gary?
No, we will be going into part 2. The issue is that the majority of the internal audit update report is part 1. There is an appendix which is in part 2, but in accordance with sort of best principles, we shouldn't put the whole report into part 2 just because one element, not small, but one element of it is part 2. So what I would suggest is that if members wish to discuss all aspects of Lisa's report, but for that particular appendix in part 1, then that is the proper way to proceed. If anybody wants to speak about that appendix, then we should go into part 2 and deal with that. And then obviously we have the other item, which is in part 2 afterwards. That's why they've been agendaed like this, so that we wouldn't be in and out of part 2, if you like.
Okay with that, Merrick? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I was planning to go through the internal audit update report, which does include a summary of all the audit work that we've done, including the report that is a part 2 item. So there will be an opportunity to discuss that to some extent. But obviously, if we start moving into the part 2 for the reason why it's in part 2, then we'll have to just leave that. So if I continue just working through the report details, yes, there were 6 audits completed since the last update I provided. 2 of them are low assurance ratings, and both of those reports are attached. There's an appendix. One of them is the part 2, so not available to the public. Just to give you an update in terms of internal audits work, there's some summary there in the report around the capacity of the team and the impact of coronavirus, the redeployment of staff, and so forth on the completion of the audit plan. So we have prioritised the audits that we have in the plan to ensure that I'm able to provide an internal audit annual opinion without any scope limitations. But I have included a paragraph here just to inform committee that should we not be able to fulfill or complete the audits that we have got left and that we have prioritised, there might be a need to give scope limitations in the internal audit annual report. CYFR's recently released guidance on that because a lot of other councils are in a similar position. So that's useful to just be clear that the scope limitations could be on a particular aspect. So should we not have sufficient coverage of either governance, risk management or internal control, then we could apply the scope limitations to just one particular aspect. I'm hopeful and we have planned that we won't have to provide any scope limitations, but that is subject to us being able to complete key audits that we have left in the plan. So if I move on to Appendix 1, which is the internal audit update report itself, as you can see, there's a table on page 189, and that just summarises the titles of the audits, summarises the assurance level and the number of issues raised, classed as either critical, major or moderate. I don't plan to go through these in any detail, but sometimes committee you see more on the low assurance reports, but just to reflect that there are some positive reviews that have come out as well, such as recruitment and retention was given a high assurance rating. Ysgol Pendraeth, which we completed the audit prior to March, was given a medium assurance rating. There was a number of issues raised here, but the report concluded that the school was in a better position given recent changes to the governance of the school to address those. Ethical culture, I think, is an important review in respect of our public sector internal audit standards. If you can remember, Gwynedd County Council did an audit of us against the public sector internal audit standards, and that was one area that they picked up on, that we should do an audit of that area. So the results of that review is summarised on page 193. It was an interesting audit in the fact that, how do you gauge an ethical culture of a council? We used a survey, which was an anonymous survey for staff to complete, and also there was one for councillors to complete as well. And we had a very good response rate on that. There was a lot of positives that we obtained from the results of the survey predominantly, and also other arrangements in place within the council to maintain a positive ethical culture. So those are listed. We did raise some moderate risk issues on that area, just around awareness of corporate policies, procedures and guidance. Those are particular ones relating to maintaining ethical behaviour, such as a code of conduct, whistleblowing policy, the employee handbook, and work has been ongoing for some time now through Gary's team through e-learning and modules and things like that. So we can see that that is improving in terms of monitoring, that people are aware of key policies and procedures and so forth. One thing that we have highlighted here is that there were some concerns raised in the survey around the whistleblowing process, about whether those concerns would be treated confidentially. So that's something to note. I know we've got that on the agenda, and there has been an increase in the number of whistleblowing concerns raised over the last couple of years. I don't know if you remember going back a few years before then, we would hardly get any whistleblowing concerns raised. So I think that's demonstrating that people have got a better awareness of the whistleblowing policy now, and also that staff are using it. So I think some more promotion of it through the e-learning and other means should help that. But also there might be some activities which we've included in the action plan to the report to further strengthen that area. And the other one is around declaration of personal and business interests and the receipts of gifts and hospitality. This is something that was picked up in the annual governance statement, so there's an update report. The previous item picks up on that as well. Again, the actions have been identified to raise awareness and improve the mechanism for reporting those among staff. The arrangements for councillors were seen to be pretty good overall. So then we move on to Queen's Building. This is a low assurance report. Again, it is included as an appendix. Don't plan to go through that, but obviously if there's any comments or questions before we move into part two, just on that summary aspect, then I can take those. Data protection and freedom of information. We carried this after COVID, so we revised the scope to include arrangements for staff working from home. So a survey of staff and line managers to just ensure that staff were locking laptops away. What were they doing with potentially sensitive information that they were holding, that type of thing, as there had been an increase in the number of data protection breaches, and one of which was reported to the ICO. But we had favourable responses to the survey, and also the information governance group is monitoring action on this, and refresher training on data protection, and it is due. So moving on to page 198, so progress in delivering the internal audit assurance. So I've listed there the 3 audits that we have prioritised, as I mentioned previously, and these are the key ones we feel to be able to provide that assurance over our governance, internal controls and risk management. So you've got Denbighshire Leisure Limited, ICT, capacity and resilience, and risk management, which is a review of the corporate risks that we haven't picked up as part of other audits. As I confirmed earlier, I think it was a question from Councillor Martin Holland, we have been successful in appointing a senior auditor for a 12-month contract, and also had the go-ahead to appoint to the vacant auditor post, which we will commence shortly. There's the table on page 199, and that just summarises the assurance work that we have completed to date and gives an update on the position with ongoing audits and lists those that have been put on hold. Progress with counter fraud work on page 202. We continue to provide advice where we can, although our capacity has been reduced, so we aren't able to investigate or undertake as much work should that arise. National Fraud Initiative, we continue to coordinate that work. The NFI for 2020-21 is underway, and also there will be a new data match this year looking at the COVID-19 business grants. So that will be a match between local authorities to look for duplicate grants paid to different councils, but to the same business. So, and like Gary mentioned, the strategy for the prevention and detection of fraud is being updated, and hopefully will come to this committee in the next few months. In terms of referrals, internal audit been made aware of 3 allegations. One has been referred to the police, was involved potentially the theft of money. We haven't had an update on that, but when I do have an update, I shall let you know. 2 have been concluded and no fraud proven, but recommendations made to strengthen controls. Internal audit performance standards, page 203. As reported previously, I think the only thing to comment on there is the issuing of final reports within 5 days. It's improved, but still taking longer than the target, and I think that's just a reflection of COVID and also the resourcing within the team. And finally, the CYFR practical guidance for audit committee, just an update on that. The Welsh Chief Auditors Group hosts an audit committee chairs network, and Councillor Barry Mellor and myself attended that in, when was it now? 30th of November that we attended that. It was a remote meeting. It was an all-day session, and it covered various matters. Audit Wales presented an item on the Local Government and Election Wales Bill, which is we had an update on earlier this morning, and also the implications, as Gary went through, on audit committees. There's also audit committee's role in risk management and its role with annual governance statement and the statement of accounts. In terms of the training that we'd arranged with CYFR on how to be a more effective audit committee had been put on hold, but we intend to contact the training provider to see if there's something that they can offer remotely. And in terms of the CYFR practical guidance for audit committees, I plan to send out the self-assessments that we completed a couple of years ago. So it'll be an opportunity to revisit that. So I'll issue that out shortly to members.
Thank you, Lisa. Good report. Could I ask Paul? Paul's put your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. One comment and 2 questions. The comment is on page 198, and it was really to say that I'm very pleased to see this reference to scope limitations. If it needs to be used, let's hope we don't, or let's hope Lisa doesn't, but it's nice to see it there as a safeguard, not just for her, but because it would draw the attention to the council and the external auditors and others of the impact of COVID and everything else on the way we're trying to work and deliver things as normal. And if that's not possible, it needs to be set out. And I'm glad it's in place, but hopefully it won't be needed. That's the comment. First question, Lisa, page 194, right at the end of your reference to ethical culture, I'm not sure if there's a typo. I was trying to work out what your sentence meant, where it says at the end of your blobs, we also highlighted that there is no formal process to monitor contractors' compliance with an agreed contract. I was trying to work out what that meant in the context of that report.
Yes, I think this was picked up in the contract management, which you've just had the revised action plan in terms of contractors fulfilling their terms and conditions. And part of that would be that they apply various policies.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And the second question was page 204 in relation to self-assessment. My own view would be that it should come sooner rather than later. so that the results can perhaps feed into the deliberations, the working groups and the developments on this Local Government and Elections Wales Act, because it's some of that self-assessment, and for goodness sake, that Act is talking about self-assessment. But beyond that, it could feed into the deliberations about the way in which this committee or its successor may operate in the future. So it was really, when are you proposing to send out the self-assessment?
Yeah, it's just a case of refreshing the survey from the previous, was it 2 years ago that I last sent it out? So I can do that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Mabon, you wanted to come in?
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Unwaith eto, dwi'n meddwl fod gwaith adran Lisa yn dangos gwerth yr hyn maen nhw'n gwneud. Adroddiadau arbennig fan hyn eto fydd. Dwi ddim am drafod Queens fan hyn, oherwydd yn bod ni'n mynd i fy mlaen i ran 2 maes o law. Ond o ran yr digartrefedd, yn pryderu ychydig ynghylch yr adroddiad yma, oherwydd da ni wedi cael sawl adroddiad mewnol neu adroddiad o flaen y cyngor neu pwyllgoren y cyngor am ddigartrefedd yn sôn am pa mor gadarnhaol ydy'r cynlluniau, pa mor obeithiol ydyn nhw, pa mor effeithiol, sydd yn wych i glywed y cynlluniau newydd yn edrych ymlaen i'r dyfodol, ond mae'r hyn sydd yn digwydd ar hyn o bryd ychydig yn wahanol i'r gobaith sydd wedi cael ei gyflwyno i ni. Da ni'n gwybod fod Llywodraeth Cymru wedi gofyn ers sawl blwyddyn bellach i awdurdodau lleol beidio ddefnyddio gwely a brecwast fel llety dros dro. Mae darllen yr adroddiad yma yn dangos yn bod ni'n dal i ddefnyddio gwely a brecwast yn bryderus. Yn fwy na hynny, mae gynna i fan hyn Stats Wales ymlaen i. A dwi'n dilyn Stats Wales yn reit gyson ac yn edrych ar ystadegau Stats Wales. A mae ystadegau Stats Wales am faint o bobl sydd mewn gwely a brecwast yn Sir Ddinbych yn dangos yn gymharol isel. Felly mae cael y data granular yma, mae Lisa a'r tîm wedi dod fyny efo, sydd yn dangos fod y niferoedd mewn gwely a brecwast yr ffaith fod lot fwy o bres yn cael ei wario arnyn nhw na beth bydde rhywun yn ddisgwyl, yn codi cwestiynau ynghylch y rhaglen digartrefedd ac effeithiolrwydd y rhaglen fel mae pethau'n sefyll. Wrth gwrs, da ni'n gwybod bod pethau ar fin newid, ond meddwl ydw i yng ngoleuni hyn a di yn werth wrach gofyn i bwyllgor scrutiny pa un dwi ddim yn siŵr, nid partneriaethau mae'n siŵr pa un di'r llall dydwch. Pwyllgor scrutiny, mae'n ddwy gynnon ni.
Communities.
Ie, perfformiad. A ddylid edrych i bwyllgor scrutiny perfformiad i edrych fewn i hyn i fwy o fanylder wrach mwyn bod yr awdurdod gyfan yn cael trosolwg llawn o'r adroddiad yma a pwyso mesur canfyddiad yma yn erbyn beth mae yr adroddiadau sydd wedi dod ger ymbroni yn y gorffennol yn ddweud.
I know, if I can come in here, Mabon, you're dead right. As a council, we shouldn't be using bed and breakfast or hotels. And last year, we tried to move away from this. But unfortunately, due to COVID, I can actually say there's 160 families in RHEOL at this moment homeless. So the council have had to use what's been at its disposal. With the Welsh Government coming out and saying they don't want to see anybody on the streets through this COVID, this is why Denbigh County Council now are looking at ways of finding a decent home for all these families to get them out the hotels and out in bed and breakfast. I'd love to see that to happen in the next few months. It won't, it'll take a while, but we are moving towards that in looking at buildings that are empty to try and accommodate these people, get them out the hotels. I mean, if you've got a family there in a hotel, they're having to share a bathroom, you know, it's just not right. And DCC, to be fair to the homeless team, I've recognised that and are working hard to try and sort it out. What I would say, a person in another council, and I won't mention the council, stood up 2 weeks ago to say how pleased he was of how their council was working, that they have no homeless families. Now, I don't get that because it's only a couple of miles away. And my worry is, are these people coming into our area and putting the burden on us?
Cyn bod Lisa yn ymateb, diolch Gadeirydd am yr ymateb yna. Gan dderbyn yr hyn ar eich chi ddweud am Covid, mae Covid wedi digwydd yn y flwyddyn 2020-2021. Mae'r adroddiad yma'n edrych ar 2019-2020, felly dydy Covid ddim yn edrych ar yr adroddiad yma, ac yn ôl yr adroddiad, Appendix 1 er enghraifft yn dangos y cynnydd sylweddol yn y defnydd o B&B a'r pres sy'n cael ei wario ar B&B yn y flwyddyn yna cyn Covid. Felly dyna pam dwi'n meddwl fod o'n werth ystyried gofyn i Bwyllgor Scrutiny Perfformiad i gymryd yr adroddiad yma a chymryd yr adroddiadau eraill sydd wedi cael eu rhoi ynghylch y gwasanaeth digartrefedd a gweld os ydyn nhw'n cyflawni'r hyn sydd wedi cael ei addo yn erbyn yr hyn mae Lisa a'r tîm wedi ganfod fan hyn.
Ie, os ni'n gallu dod nôl ar hynny, o'n i wedi gobeithio cyfro'r Appendix 2 ar wahân, fel dyn ni fel arfer cyn y newid o gynnwys nhw fel rhan o'r yr internal audit update. Mae Lisa Hart yn rhan o'r cyfarfod yma, a hi ar gwneud yr archwiliad, ac mae Phil Gilroy, pennaeth y gwasanaeth, a Ann Lloyd yn mynd i ymuno'r cyfarfod hefyd, i allu jyst rhoi bach o assurance iddo chi am y gwaith maen nhw yn bwriadu gwneud. Ond cymryd eich pwynt bod os mae pethau i edrych yn mwy manwl, dwi'n gwybod mae Graham Bowes ar y lein hefyd a Councillor Bobby Feely, ac mae dipyn o gwybodaeth di mynd i scrutiny yn barod am hyn, ac dwi'n siŵr bydd nhw'n gallu rhoi diweddariad ar hynny ac be mwy fysa'n gallu mynd yna. Ond ie, dwi'n meddwl bod y droddiad archwiliad mewnol wedi mynd i scrutiny o'r blaen, ond dwi'n cymryd eich pwynt oherwydd rhai o'r pethau dyn ni wedi darganfod fel rhan o'r archwiliad, fysa gwerth iddyn nhw edrych arnyn nhw mewn bach mwy o fanylder yn fanne, yn lle mynd i mewn i manylder yn y cyfarfod yma. So, fysa'n iawn i gyfeirio at Lisa Hart, iddi hi jyst rhoi bach o summary o'r adroddiad a pigo fyny rhai pwyntiau penodol ac wedyn rhoi siawns i'r gwasanaeth ddod fewn hefo safbwynt nhw.
Diolch Lisa. Gadeirydd, os ydy o'n iawn efo chi, fyswn ni'n diolchgar i glywed ymateb Lisa Hart.
Yes, okay.
Oh, hello everyone. Yeah, I'll just give a quick overview of the audit report. So yeah, we carried out a review of the homeless accommodation provision during early 2020. So this was prior to the COVID lockdown, as Mabon has just said. Has greatly impacted the community support services and has substantially increased the demand for temporary and emergency accommodation. It's worth noting that it's not only community support services that has responsibility within the council, and other services such as community housing were also involved in our audit. During our review, we could see that the council is taking a more strategic and corporate approach to accommodating homeless citizens, particularly through a cross-service senior management team and the strategic housing and homelessness group that includes relevant heads of service, a corporate director and several cabinet lead members. This has resulted in better engagement between the key services involved. However, some of the alternative longer term measures that they they've come up with in their plans to reduce the reliance on bed and breakfast and hotels will take time to deliver, and there are significant budgetary pressures for the council in accommodating the homeless citizens. The strategic review of charging we've revised as needed. A charging policy has previously been explored by community support services for emergency accommodation, but was not pursued due to the cost of implementing and managing the system. This should be reviewed, as there may be a lack of incentive for citizens to secure permanent tenancies, as the rent will be unaffordable in comparison. Operationally, staff would benefit from having documented procedures for key processes and having independent quality assurance checks to ensure consistency and compliance with legislation. There were staffing issues prior to our review within the homeless prevention team, but they were fully resourced by the time we started our audit. But these staffing issues are clearly impacted on workload, resulting in a higher caseload. This had resulted in less regular checks of accommodation and the citizens that reside there, a lack of regular monitoring of payments and arrears, and some key information not being recorded effectively, either duplicated or not easy to find. The reason for homelessness was not recorded in all cases, or outcomes when cases are closed. And as part of our testing, we struggled to find evidence that cases have been reviewed or evidenced why some citizens took priority over others for leased accommodation. That's what I wanted to just go over. I just wanted to sort of answer one's point, really. As you said, it was 1920 where we looked at the review, and we asked the question why there was a substantial sort of increase in citizens staying for B&Bs for longer periods. I think it was about 73 days was the average length of staying at the bed and breakfast at that time. And we were advised at that time that more people were presenting at homeless, even prior, obviously, to the COVID pandemic. But also, as I've just mentioned, the staffing issues that I've just spoken about had impacted, obviously, on workload. And also the other factor was about not having the suitable accommodation to move them on to as well. As I said, I'm happy to take questions, and as Lisa's just said, Anne Lloyd is here and Phil Gilroy from the Community Support Services, and also Graham and the relevant lead member, Bobby Feely.
Thanks for that, Liz. Mabon, did you want to come back before anybody, other members come in?
Na, ddim ond rhannu, diolch. Wyrach ar ôl clywed y drafodaeth ymhellach, fydd o'n sbarduno ychydig yn fwy o gwestiynau.
Okay, thanks. Any other members want questions for Lisa? Lise, sorry. I don't see any hands from the committee. No? Okay. Merrick, you had your hand up.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mr Cadeirydd. Oce, yn gyntaf ymddiheuro i chi fel Cadeirydd ac i Lisa am i mi dorri mewn ar eich traws chi a chitha ar gychwyn. Ond diolch i Gary am fy ngoleuo. Ar tudalen 195, tudalen 9 yn y rhan yna, da ni'n sôn am adeiladau'r Frenhines. Dwi'n yn gwybod ai dyma'r lle i roi'r ateb, ond oedd o'n mhoeni fi wrth ddarllen yr linell yma. A revised business case was taken to Cabinet September 2020. Contract procedure rules have not been adhered to. Ond o waith o hynny, dwi'n meddwl bod fi wedi gweld yr ole, but the minutes do not demonstrate approval. Wel, dwi wedi syni at hynny, fel arfer, mae'n cofnodwyr ni yn andos o dda, ond o hwnna'n ymhoeni fi pyn bach bod y cofnod ddim wedi'w gael. Diolch yn fawr.
I don't know who can take that one. Should that be in part 2? Cheers, Gary.
I think probably best for it, if you're going to get involved in the detail of that report, to deal with it in part 2, and I can deal with that then.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, we'll leave that to part 2, Merrick. Yep, thank you. Any other questions for Lise? No. Merrick, Mabon, you wanted to come back?
Sori, felly yn absenoldeb yn drafodaeth pellach, dwi yn cynnig yn bod ni'n gofyn i bwyllgor scrutiny, sori, Gary eisiau dod fewn.
Sori Mabon, dwi jyst i cofio beth yn mynd i ddeud ynglyn â craffu. Mae'r caderyddion gael alwad gan cynghorwyr Penlington a Swinglon ynglyn â'r aildrefniad i wneud efo ddigartrefi, neu'r gwasanaeth ddigartrefi. Ac maen nhw wedi gytuno cymryd adroddiad i partneriaethau, dwi'n meddwl, yn yr Hydref, y tymor o'r Hydref, ddim yn mis Hydref, dwi'n meddwl hollol siŵr o'r dyddiad, i edrych ar sut mae'r model newydd o delio efo ddigartrefi yn gweithio. So, dwi'n meddwl os mae yna awydd gan y pwyllgor i gymryd rhywbeth arall at craffu i wneud efo'r gwasanaeth, wrach os mae yna ofyniad yn mynd i fewn i'r caderyddion i weld os maen nhw'n eisiau sort of, newid dipyn bach ffocws yr adroddiad hynny gan gynnwys pethau eraill, ond mae ar y rhaglen waith i partneriaethau fel maw.
Mi na i gymryd arweiniad y cadeirydd felly yn hynny o beth.
Yeah, thanks, Mabon. Yeah, as I say, as Gary mentioned, it did come to chairs and vice chairs, and yeah, because they're in consultation at the moment, that we would look at it, send it, I think, like Gary said, performance, to give a good 6 months to have a look of where things were going. That's okay with yourself?
Mae hynna'n dderbyniol gan gymryd felly fel rhan o drosolwg amgenach hefyd, yn naturiol mae hwn yn mynd i adroddiad Lisa a'r tîm, neu Lisa a'r tîm yn mynd i fwydo fewn i hynny mwyn cael trosolwg amgenach ar yr adran a'r darpariaeth fel tai.
Sorry, Mr Cadeirydd, jyst i ddweud, dwi'n meddwl mae'n gwneud synwyr os mae'r gwasanaeth yn mynd i pwyllgor craffu yn yr Hydref i trio gael rhyw fath o adroddiad sydd yn gynnwys gyd o'r materion mae aelodau eisiau trafod ynglyn â'r gwasanaeth yn lle gymryd mwy nag un adroddiad i wahanol llefydd mewn dechrau splintro dipyn bach. So dwi'n meddwl na i cysylltu gyda rhian a geith rhian cysylltu efo'r gwasanaeth am fod y gwasanaeth yn dod at craffu, bod nhw jyst yn neud siŵr fod caderyddion yn hapus o be maen nhw'n ofyn i'r adroddiad cyfro.
Thanks, Gary. You happy with that, Mabon?
Diolch Cadeirydd, diolch Gary.
Thank you, Mabon. Just before we move on, I just noted Tony's hand go up. Tony, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's not so much a question; it's a comment. Because I went around 3 years ago with the homeless prevention team, and I went into several of the B&Bs, the old hotels on the seafront, that are being used for homeless. And I was absolutely appalled, and I said this at the time, where in a room where someone was meant to be living, was the only cooking facility was an old microwave that looked, you know, it looked as if it had gone way past its, you know, sort of sell-by date. And also, and I think you just mentioned, Chair, about, you know, maybe you've got about 4 bedrooms on a floor that were using the same bathroom. How humiliating is that? But the point is, I was told, and this, as I say, this is about 3 years ago, that they were going to do away with these B&Bs, these old hotels on the seafront, using these to accommodate people, and that it was fully known that they weren't suitable. I'm surprised, I really am, that we're still using them. I had no idea we're still using them. And so really more has to be done here. I mean, it just isn't acceptable. More has to be done here. Greater effort has to be put in. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Tony. And I'm 100% with you on that, Tony. The only problem is when we put so many homeless that we've got at this moment in time, the thing is getting them off that street and making sure they've got a home and a bed at night. And I know it's not ideal. And I know DCC are putting in plans now to move forward, that we don't see this situation again. I'm confident things will improve and to get away from using these hotels. Alan, you wanted to come in before we move on?
Thanks, Chair. There's been suggestions that we appear in Denbighshire to be taking homeless people, families and whatever from other counties. Is there any evidence in the audit, or is there any evidence at all around this that is putting this great pressure on, or is it just purely?
Alan, your mic is up by your ear, mate, and it's difficult to hear you.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm probably talking through my head, aren't I, again? Okay, what I was suggesting was there seems to be comments around that we're accepting as a county council homeless people from other areas. Is there any evidence to back this up, or is it just pure hearsay?
Lise, do you want to respond to any of these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find any specific in my sample testing of any accepting any home side of county at all. Anne and Phil might be able to help me here, but there is an arrangement almost where they can turn it, but then they have to do a process, I think, to obviously send them back to their original area. But Anne and Phil might be able to provide a bit more clarity on that. But I said certainly in my sample testing, I didn't find evidence of anybody outside of county. All I saw was at Denbighshire, people that have connection with the local area.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lee.
Okay.
Anybody from the service itself that wants to answer?
Yeah, Chair, I'll try and respond if I can.
Thanks, Phil.
We do have people from other local authority areas being placed in Denbighshire facilities as homeless, and we also place our own citizens out of county as well, and that's often related to issues such as domestic violence and the need to not be placed where the perpetrator of that violence lives. It could be for other special needs where they need a particular environment that supports them. So it does happen. We don't accept people into Denbigshire's homelessness facilities. There is no requirement on any local authority to request that from another. Any local authority can place their citizens in accommodation anywhere, basically in Wales or England for that matter. If that helps them fulfil their duty because it comes under the duty to provide accommodation. If that accommodation can't be provided within your own county, then clearly you need to seek facilities elsewhere. The numbers aren't generally high. I think we have more people placed out of county than we have other counties placing with us. But it is small numbers compared to the overarching numbers that we have. Hope that helps, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks very much. Okay, members. Moving on, Lisa, is anything else you want to add?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thanks very much. Going to the recommendation that the committee considers report content.
Chair.
Gary.
Sorry to butt in. The issue is you have a part 2 appendix that we said we're going to discuss in part 2. So I think you may want to take the recommendations once you've dealt with
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
The whole report. Otherwise, it sort of finishes off the item before members have had the chance to speak about other things.
Thanks very much. Okay, then, if we can move in to part 2, press and public, if they can leave the meeting. Can I have a proposal for moving into part 2? I've got Paul proposing and Alan James seconding. Yeah. And do we know? Are the committee happy with that, moving into part 2 now? Show of hands.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're just dropping the webcast now to make sure that's just